Welcome, everyone. My name is Neil with Portal to Ascension. Thank you all so much for being here with us today. We have another amazing presentation. This Today we are presenting you Tricia McCannon, the Divine Sophia, Mary Magdalene, and the Return of the Divine Sophia. And this is one of many webinars that we have done with Tricia since the end of last year, and we're going to be doing quite a few more in the near future. This one is going to be pretty amazing. I'm really interested in this topic and the divine Sophia energy, especially with what's going on now on the planet Earth with the return of the divine energy, is very much important for us to connect with this essence and see what it really is and the history of it. So a little bit about Tricia. She is a renowned American clairvoyant, historian, researcher, and teacher who has traveled the world in search of answers to the greatest mysteries of the ages. She has been a headliner at a lot of conferences around the world and appeared on many radio shows, including Coast to Coast, Dreamland, Gaiam TV, and a number of international documentaries. She's the author of 13 online books, 30 DVDs, and the acclaimed books Dialogues with the Angels, Jesus, the Lost Years, and the Ancient Mystery Religions, and Return of the Divine Sophia, Healing the Earth through the Lost Teachings of Jesus, Isis, and Mary Magdalene. Today's topic is, as I said, Mary Magdalene and the Return of the Divine Sophia. And known as the Sophia, the goddess of wisdom to the Gnostics, the Essenes, and the Greeks, she was Isis to the Egyptians, the I Am presence of the Divine Mother. She of 10,000 names and 10,000 faces, the Queen of Heaven and of Earth, she returns through compassion again and again to uplift humanity. So Tricia, welcome.
Oh, hi, Neil. What a pleasure, and a pleasure to be with all of our listeners out there all around the country, and some of you maybe outside of the United States. I hope everyone's having a wonderful day over here in Atlanta. The sun is shining. It was, 35 degrees this morning, but I think it's up to about 58. So I wish we had a way to turn on our audio so I could hear everyone else speak too. But I know we have that wonderful chat box over there, and I've got mine up. So if people do wind up asking questions, but I'll take a look from time to time and see what you said, and certainly at the end we'll try to address those, because this is in fact an incredibly interesting topic, and we have a lot to go through. But today is going to be a lot about the hidden history of who Mary Magdalene actually was, and why her return to the world in our age is so very, very critical. I just think that this is one of the things that's happening on the planet right now in terms of the awakening of the divine feminine. And I'm actually looking at starting an organization around this rising of the divine feminine in this next year, and hopefully getting that website up and going to help those of us who are interested, both men and women, in bringing a more balanced consciousness to the world, to have a forum to be able to interact with, and organizations that we can actually become a part of if we want to, around the environment, around Gaia, around the oceans and the rivers and so forth. And so, just stay tuned, stay in touch with me, and send me your email if I don't already have it. I'll put you on my newsletter list, and I'll let you know sort of as the development of that progresses. So Neil, should I click share screen or just go straight over to my presentation now? Neil, you there?
Go ahead and click share screen and start your presentation.
Okay, perfect. I'm always a little challenged to do all this technology, and Neil is such a maestro. He's really, really great. So I always feel excited when I get to work with him. Now let's just see how slideshow from the beginning. In fact, we begin. I love this image of Mary Magdalene, and clearly, as you're going to see throughout this presentation, for 2,000 years there have been images of Mary Magdalene that have been created, and many of them actually show her with blonde and red hair, but a lot of them actually show her with this chalice, and you're going to begin to discover how the chalice and the path that she was teaching, the path that Jesus and she both were working on teaching to bring consciousness to the world, is connected with the Holy Grail and with the chalice. But before we jump completely into this, I want to just mention a few things about myself. I don't know if many of you have heard me speak in person, or if you've heard me on YouTube or radio, or you've read my books, or you've sat in on some of these webinars before. But these are the 3 books that I have out there. And each one of them is remarkable for different reasons. The Dialogues with the Angels book really talks about the awakening of my clairvoyant gifts from the time I was a girl. I grew up across from a great forest, and how I began to interact with the elementals, the divas, and then an angel when I was about 8 years old, and how the masters came to see me and initiated me from the age of about 19 in the teachings of soul travel and the wisdom of the Viragi master. So this is a fun read, easy to read, 1 or 2 days, and you learn a tremendous amount about it, about the multidimensional nature of reality, but really through the unfolding of some of my story in my early years. And I think it'll resonate with a lot of people who have been in the process of awakening themselves. I've had people say, oh my gosh, this was just reminding me so much of my own life. So this is always the first book I say people should order. You can order them from me, or you can order them through Amazon. That's just fine. This is the second book that I wrote, but it's usually the third one I suggest people read because this is a tour de force of the great spiritual mysteries, where Jesus went, who he studied with, from the Celts to the Essenes, the Druids, the Mithrans, the Persians, the Brahmins, the Buddhist, the Magi, and 7 years in the temples of ancient Egypt. So this book, as many of you know, has about 100 pages of back matter and 1,200 footnotes and over 100 illustrations. So it's a profound, wonderful, amazing, incredibly honoring book to who Jesus really, really was, that has been suppressed in a lot of traditional Christianity. And it connects the dots between the wisdom of the ancient mysteries in the ancient world and the wisdom that Jesus was teaching, rather than it be, you're a Christian and everyone else has to be exterminated on the planet, or you're an Arab and the same thing, or you're a Jew and the same thing. No, in fact, all of these paths at that deeper esoteric level actually fit together in a very, very beautiful way. So this book is historically based. It's certainly not channeled, but the masters were with me the whole 3 years I was writing it. So it has about 144 initiatory codes that really activate people. And many, many people write and tell me this book has changed their life, that they've been having dreams and visitations from these masters ever since reading it. And I think this is true for all the work that I do. This is the book that came out about this March, actually, this month. It'll be 2 years ago. And this is actually the image that I hope, it's done by an incredible artist named Marios, that I'm going to use for the banner for this new website, Sophia Rising, because it says it so perfectly, the divine feminine in balance. This book is about the hidden secret history of the planet, going back tens of thousands of years, where basically our ancestors saw that every creature that gave life, that gave birth from humans to animals, was a female. So therefore, they figured that who would have created the universe was the divine feminines, because that's what nature tells us. It's logical. And so for tens of thousands of years, God was considered the divine mother. And as long as that model was held, there was no war. There were partnership societies between men and women, inequality, and things were peaceful. But then it became the divine father and mother, and then divine father, mother, daughter, son, and then the divine daughter, son, and mother were eliminated. And when that happened, the patriarchy really took over at least 3,000 years ago. And we've had war, and more war, actually for about 4,000 years. So, and of course, we got the son back with Christianity, but we never really got the daughter back. Most people don't even know there was a daughter, but we're going to be talking about her today. And they don't know there was a mother, although Mary, the mother, has been honored, of course, by the Catholic Church for many centuries. And thank goodness for that we've maintained that. This is my new book that's coming out in the fall. It'll either be September or October. And this is a really profound book about what I've discovered about the nature and origins of who we really are, the existence of something called the angelic twin that's essential for our understanding of mastery. And it's connected with what we're going to be talking about towards the end of the presentation today, which is the sacred marriage. And the sacred marriage being aspects that are multidimensional in nature. This book also talks a lot about the map of heaven and the landscapes of heaven and what's on the other side, and how the whole mechanism of life and death and rebirth acts. As many of you know, I've had a mystery school here in Atlanta for about 12 years. the Phoenix Fire Lodge Mystery School. And for the first time, about 3 years ago, you could actually order discourses online. So I have students from all around the world studying. So if you're interested in knowing more about the mysteries, you can just go to my website at triciamccannon.com or triciamccannonspeaks.com, and it'll wind up, there's a section that says mysteries and the online classes. There's 13 of them. The introduction, if you write me at my email, triciamccannon1111, at yahoo.com, I'm happy to send you the introduction for free. And then you can go in and order either individually, or you can order the first 3 as a set, the second 3, and so forth. And it saves you about $75 when you do that. So it's a really great deal. I also have a lot of supporting DVDs around the Egyptian mysteries, the Hebrew or Jewish mysteries, the Christian mysteries, the ancient Egyptian mysteries, the Native American twisted hair tradition, Hermetics, angels, UFOs, ancient history, hidden history, the Anunnaki gods, and so forth. So again, you can see all that on my website. I work with the Divine Father and Mother, as you probably have figured out, the male and the female polarities. And I think that bringing them back into balance is essential in the world today. These are the 2 Hermetic symbols for the Divine Father: the eagle, the one who can get above the picture and has clear sight and broad wings, and the dove, the Holy Spirit that we know in Christianity. These symbols that we've inherited in Christianity have actually been passed down to us through the centuries, and they're essential to really what I think is needed in the world to heal our planet and to heal our consciousness today. And so I mentioned them at the beginning because we're going to be talking about this divine feminine and masculine energy throughout our whole presentation. In fact, Jesus spoke openly about this as the divine Father, Mother, God, or the Abba Father, Amma, Mother, God. Of course, in our New Testaments, that's been edited out to be the Father God, only the Father God, because basically the Roman Empire was patriarchal, the Jewish patriarchs were patriarchal, and so what we've had for the last 2,000 years or more is a heavily patriarchal society, and this is kind of one of the ways we've gotten out of balance. And I loved this image because it shows the heart, the chakra system, the Vesica Piscis here that we're going to be talking about, and the face of the male and the face of the female together. And it's really that joining that Mary Magdalene and Jesus were speaking about, although most of this has been covered up. So now we want to begin our journey into Mary Magdalene and the return of the divine Sophia. And we want to begin by speaking first about who Sophia is. Now, Sophia is actually, the Greeks called Sophia the name for the divine mother of wisdom, absolute wisdom. And then later the Hebrews picked this up because in their more higher consciousness state, the Hebrews, particularly the Essenes, actually studied Hermetic philosophy. They studied Greek philosophy. They studied Pythagoras, who spent 22 years studying in the temples of Egypt and the city of Diopolis. So the ancient name for the Divine Mother in the Greek, in the Hebrew world at least, was Sophia. And this is kind of what the Nag Hammadi texts, which are, of course, were discovered in 1945 in these caves in Egypt, what these Nag Hammadi texts say. These, of course, are texts that were buried by the original Christian Gnostics. She who exists before the all, I move in every creature. I am the invisible one within the all. I am both mother and father, since I procreate myself. I am the womb that gives shape to the all. I am the glory of the mother. And this is from the trimorphic Protentia found among the Nag Hammadi texts. And so this is the Divine Mother that they were praying to. It's the one who encompasses both the male and the female within itself, the one who has no equal, the one from which the Divine Father and Mother as subsets are actually born. So this is why she was known as the Virgin of the World. I don't know how many of you have thought about this, but when I grew up in Christianity here in the Bible Belt in the South, I remember thinking, who cares if Mary, the mother of Jesus, was a virgin? I mean, who cares? That's like, what's the point of that? But, of course, that's part of the Christian doctrine. What they're doing is they are trying to establish a connection between Mary and this higher virgin of the world. Isis was also known as a virgin. You have Artemis, who was a virgin. And you go on and on and on. They're all connecting these, let us say, aspects of the divine feminine that have incarnated throughout the centuries with this divine mother that is behind it all, the procreator before there were dualities like male and female. And you can see, by the way, with her, she's arrayed many times with these stars around her. She's usually in Isis blue, and there's also pink usually around her because the heart chakra is green and pink, and she embodies the emanation of unconditional love. I love this. This is a gorgeous painting by one of my favorite painters, Nicholas Roerich. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him, but he was from the 1920s and 30s, and he actually was an ambassador. He was very highly regarded in political circles, but he was also a painter and a mystic. And he and his wife, Helena Roerich, wound up going to look for Shambhala over in India. And they wound up supposedly finding the city with the tree of life that had all these different fruits, every fruit in the world on it. But he decided to stay there because the depth and breadth of what he found was so profound. And he began to paint these beautiful paintings of the Divine Mother and also of Issa, or Jesus. And this one is, of course, perfect for Isis. Isis was the I am principle, the, I am that I am. Is the female aspect of that. I is, I be, I emanate, I am. And so in the ancient world, part of the purpose of the mysteries was to pull back the veil of nature and see behind the visible or mundane world to the majesty and the intelligence of consciousness that lies behind everything that we see, everything we touch. And of course, most of us have really fallen out of touch with that because once the Newtonian version of physics came into power, everything was just the visible third dimensional world. And things like quantum physics and subatomic particles and waveforms and particles, or vibration and energy and matter, we didn't understand the correlation 100, 200, 300, 500 years ago. And then when Darwinianism came in, Charles Darwin, who taught survival of the fittest, it all became very much a struggle for dominance and competition that supposedly was nature's law. Well, actually what nature's law is that cooperation is the way that nature works. The plants need the soil, the animals need the plants, we need the plants, the animals, and the soil, and that all of nature, if it's in balance, works in a cooperative, symbiotic way. And so this is such a beautiful image of the Divine Mother and the veils that separate us from understanding that consciousness permeates the universe. It's really gorgeous, isn't it? So the term Sophia, Pythagoras actually coined the word philosophy. I don't know if you guys know that. He lived about 500 BC. So what is philosophia? It's a lover of wisdom, a lover of the Divine Mother of wisdom. And that's where we get philosophy today. In fact, Andrew Harvey and Anne Baring, who are lovely, wonderful writers who have written a lot about the Divine Feminine, say that in the Kabbalistic tradition, which is the esoteric Jewish or Hebrew tradition, which was very, very wise, even though the outside tradition had lost its way. In the Kabbalistic tradition, describes the feminine image of the Godhead as the mother, the daughter, the sister, and the Holy Spirit, giving woman what she has lacked throughout the last 2,500 years in Judeo-Christian culture, an image of the divine feminine in the Godhead that is reflected at the human level in herself. The Shekinah is divine motherhood, the mother of all that is living. And Andrew Harvey, both of these guys are such wonderful writers. If you ever get a chance to pick up, they've got some wonderful, very inspired little books about the divine feminine. About the Shekinah, they say, in the imagery of the Shekinah, and the Shekinah is the Jewish daughter principle. It's the breath of God. It's the sine wave. It's the way our heartbeat moves and our brain waves move. It's the way the wind currents move. It's the way the waves in the water moves. It's the yin yang up and down symbol of how all of life is structured: male and female, female and male, up and down. So the Shekinah is the carrier wave, the Holy Spirit. That's what we call it in Christianity, the Holy Spirit that carries the light and the sound of the divine, of the Creator, out to the furthest reaches of the universe. So they say in the imagery of the Shekinah, the Kabbalah gives us the cosmology of the soul and the relationship between the two aspects of the Godhead that has been lost or hidden for millennia. In other words, God the Father is not all there is. There's also this beautiful balance with God the Mother, or the Divine Mother, or the Divine Feminine, or the Goddess, whichever terms we wish to use. The Shekinah reveals the missing imagery of God as Mother that has been lost or obscured in both Judaism and Christianity. Now, this actual knowledge began to arise in the 10th century because there had been such suppression for over 1,000 years about the Divine Mother. I mean, for example, all the male apostles got halos in the 1st and 2nd and 3rd centuries. By the 3rd century, they definitely had them. Mary, the mother, didn't get a halo, I think, till the 900s. So that tells you something about what the Boys Club had to say about women. So the ancients believed that this divine feminine presence exists as God the Mother, but also as God the Daughter. And this is such a beautiful image. We see the symbol for the Divine Father. Here's the eagle. Beautiful, the father energy, and the mother sitting on the throne of the Divine Father, which really kind of has two aspects, and holding, of course, the Son of God. And this is a Christian image, and really there were many initiates hidden within the ranks of the painters and the sculptors and the artists and the architects of the ancient world that knew that this information would be completely lost if it was not encoded in paintings or architecture or cathedrals. And so if you are an initiate and you understand these codes and keys, you can begin to decode these things as you travel around the world. I know I've traveled through France and England and Italy and Poland and Mexico and Egypt and all of these places, and the information is there if you have the eyes to see it, or you have a teacher who is able to decode it for you. So very important when you travel. So there is Sophia the mother, but there's also Sophia the daughter. And we're going to talk about Sophia the daughter because there's a Gnostic myth, and you guys probably remember that at the time of Jesus, there were the Pharisees and the Sadducees who were really sort of political and financially money-grabbing, and the usual thing that many times happens when people have absolute power. And then there were the Essenes, who really had preserved the ancient knowledge. They had been waiting really for the next Horus king to arrive, which Jesus was honored as that being, as we're going to see. But those early Christians then became known as Gnostics. And what we once thought was a strange little eccentric offshoot of Christianity, we've come to realize now, since the discovery of the Nag Hammadi text and Dead Sea Scrolls, that Gnosticism was the original Christianity. It was probably closer to the real teachings of Jesus than any other form of Christianity. So the Gnostics struggle to make sense in the patriarchal world in which they lived of how in the world humanity could have fallen. Now, the patriarchal version is the one we've all been given. The Garden of Eden, Eve ate the apple, Eve's to blame. Let's blame it on all Eve. Women have to suffer and be subjugated to men for the rest of eternity because of that. That's actually not the original story. The original story was that man and woman was created together, and everything they did together, and it wasn't Eve's fault. Everybody has to take responsibility. But the patriarchy, the Hebrew patriarchy, changed that in the version of the Old Testament we have today. So here are the Gnostics, in that first century after Jesus, struggling to make sense of the fall of humankind, the fall of consciousness. How did it all take place? So they made up another story. So this is an interesting story. Is it true? Who knows, okay? But I'm going to share it with you because they believed that periodically the divine daughter comes to earth. And she's both human and she is divine. And they believe that she is continually incarnated on this planet in order to redeem humankind, just as the male Christ has done the same thing. So this is their story. They believe, first off, that Mary Magdalene was an incarnation of Sophia, the daughter. And this is a big aha for a lot of us, because this is not something we were ever taught. I was not taught this in church. Were you guys? My dad was Baptist. My mom was Methodist. I was confirmed as Episcopalian at 13. I kind of loved Episcopalian because it was kind of like Catholic light. You had all the beauty and so forth, but you didn't have the guilt, which was really nice, and no punishments. Yay. So Mary Magdalene was known as Mary Sophia in the years following the crucifixion. And you're going to begin to sort of see why as you find out kind of the teachings that she shared. And I've brought some of those into this presentation to share with you. Now, these symbols that these painters have made of her are so wonderful. And I want to point some of them out because you're going to see them laced throughout the religious art, which tells you who was an initiate and who wasn't. Many times she's shown carrying this beautiful chalice, because part of what she taught was a path called the way of the chalice, which, yes, is linked to the Holy Grail. And we're going to be speaking about that in a bit. But she's also normally shown with blonde or red or blondish red hair, usually long and beautiful and flaming, and with the dove around her. These are her classic symbols. So Sophia is the maiden in this Gnostic myth that they believe became lost from her divine parents. So in other words, up there in the heavenly realms, there was the divine father and mother, daughter and son. So in their version of reality, this daughter became lost or separated from her brother, from her mother, and from her father. So she went looking for them someplace up there in the higher dimensions, but she couldn't find them no matter where she looked. So she began to entertain herself by creating on her own. Totally understandable, much of as we might do the same kind of thing. But because she created the world without the divine masculine principle, in the Gnostic version of reality, the world was created really out of balance. And so, in other words, if the male had created without the female, the world would be out of balance, as we can see by our society today. But if the female creates without the male, the world can also be out of balance. So without these two in balance together in a sacred union, then the world was created out of balance. That was their explanation for what had gone wrong. Now, in their story, she, since obviously the world isn't too feminine, too sensitive, too empathetic, too kind, too loving. No, that's not the world's problem. The world's too competitive, stressful, strife-ridden, dominating, violent, etc. So how did that happen? That sounds like, to me, more like negative male energy. Not to say that there's not positive male energy. This is the negative version, though. So in their version of reality, she created a demigod. they called it the demiurgus, called Ildebroth, okay? And he's like the shadow energy. So he's, in the Gnostic version, he was a tyrant. He was a very powerful tyrant that decided to take command over our world, to dominate our world, to infiltrate our world, to keep us suppressed, to keep us ignorant, to keep us in fear, to keep us out of the vibration of love, which is so necessary for our ascension. So this is sort of a Zeus picture, and some of them did actually associate the Ildebroth with Zeus, or some of the patriarchal domination of some of the Anunnaki gods that came to visit our planet. But they believed it was an energy that was out of balance in itself. So what could Sophia do? Sophia, the daughter, when she realized this mistake, she decided, in order to save her creation, that number one, she would activate our hearts, and that she would redeem the world by incarnating within it. And so she continually comes down again and again and again in order to deliver the message of love and forgiveness and kindness and unity. And periodically, the male Christ also comes down, but she continually reincarnates. And this is why she was known as she of 10,000 names and 10,000 faces. She incarnates into the world of form, the worlds of form, not just this planet, but other worlds, again and again and again, until the people in that world begin to awaken and to their connection with love, to their own angelic natures, and join together in unity. So while there is much that is wondrous in this world that we live in, we live on a paradise planet, even though we seem to be destroying it, there's also a lot of strife and conflict, primarily caused really by the humans and by our imbalanced ways, as we, seek to kill the animals and pollute the soil and pollute the water and all the crazy things we seem to be doing, just like raging bulls. So in their understanding, this daughter principle awaits the moment when humanity will once again awaken and allow her to come back into the consciousness so that she can pour this wisdom down into the world. And she is the divine Sophia within the worlds of form. So she is also, of course, a direct aspect of the Divine Mother, just as the Christ, the male Christ, is a direct aspect or emanation of the Divine Father energy. So she was known as the woman who came to earth. And once again, we see these same symbols. Here's the chalice, here's the long reddish hair, here's the dove. And you can see she's a solar energy. She's not, she holds both solar and lunar energies within herself, as Jesus did, the male and female Christ. So she's actually the female Christ. And of course, this is a new idea for a lot of people. A female Christ, goodness, what are we talking about? Is it possible there's a female Christ? Well, of course, everything in the lower worlds is created in balance. If there's a male Christ, there has to be a female Christ. And as Jesus said, and I talk about this in my Return of the Divine Sophia book, he says that periodically the divine son and daughter come to earth, even as I and Mary Magdalene have come. Well, of course, as we're going to begin to ask, if this is the female Christ that had come with the male Christ, what the heck happened and why has she been vilified for 2,000 years? We're going to take a look at that. So again, I just love these incredibly tuned in artists that are channeling these sacred symbols. You can see here she's holding a giant chalice with a solar light behind it and within it. And here is the six-pointed Star of David that is the balanced male and female together. So many believe when we look back in time that these divine presences have come in earlier incarnations. For example, in Egypt, they were known as Isis and Osiris, divine son, divine daughter energies that came again as a match set to teach love, balance, and unconditional service. And of course, Osiris, as many of you may know with the story of Osiris, after the flood, the world was devastated. People were starving. And Osiris was one of the Anunnaki gods, as was Isis. And he traveled the world for 450 years. He brought people together with music and food. He taught them how to plant and how to raise their own food. So he became known as the Greek god. And so, he healed the sick. He traveled. He taught. All of the same kind of wise things that Jesus did. And then he was taken out by the dark forces, his evil brother Set, who represents ego and ambition and ruthlessness. And then Isis brought him back to life for a short period, and they conceived a child, Horus. And then Set found Osiris again when Isis had gone to get help and chopped him into 14 little pieces. This is the original Egyptian story, which is encoded with lots and lots of esoteric meaning once you begin to understand the Hermetic symbolism of the mysteries and how this all plays out. But you can see again this balance even in the sacred geometry, and I take my hat out to all these wonderful artists that have channeled this information, whether they knew they were initiates or not. You can see it in their paintings. She may also have incarnated as in the Celtic lands as Brigid or Bridget, later turned into a nun, Bridget, by the Catholic Church because they couldn't get rid of her altogether. So they just converted her into a Christian nun. Yet long before Christianity ever existed, Brigid or Bridget the bride was a smithy. She was a bringer of the arts, of music, of dance, also of writing, and knowledge and illumination. So, you can see here she's holding the light and she's got that red hair again. Very, very interesting. Partner of the male Christ in many times in many different ages. We can think of her in a certain way as a rebalancing energy. In the ancient world and the Greek world, there was a goddess named Themis. Themis is she holds the balance scales of life. And like when you go to any courtroom and you see justice, with the blindfold, blind justice, is not to mean that justice is blind, although that seems to be true in a lot of the court systems today, where it's less about what's right and more about what's clever. But the reason that the blindfold is over her eyes is to indicate that it doesn't matter if you're a prince or a pauper, that truth is truth, justice is justice, and we're not going to be looking at the externals of how much money you have or how much power you have. We're going to actually look at the karmic rebalancing of the scales. And so, and again, we see that the whole chalice. So she was always tied to the mysteries of the Black Madonna or the hidden Madonna, as is Isis. Both of those individuals are deeply linked, and this is actually a photograph from a cave in a place called Sainte Marie de la Mer, which is in the south of France, and it's a place where Mary Magdalene and Mary the Mother and Joseph of Arimathea went after the crucifixion. It's the home of the Black Madonna, and all of these shrines are actually originally Isis shrines. Well, why the Black Madonna? It's the hidden mother. It's the presence of the hidden womb from which all things spring, before there even was a divine father, mother, or any of the dimensions, or any of the worlds, or any of the planes, before there was matter. It's the hidden one. So this being source back to the womb of all of creation. And of course is linked the flow of that spirit of love, that Shekinah energy that we call the Holy Spirit, that goes out into the world to allow the universe to come into creation. I think this is, again, very, very beautiful. We've got the chakras here and the point of illumination at the very top with the male and female Christ. So what's interesting is actually the Gnostics believed that the male Christ could not return until the female Christ is re-enthroned in the world. In other words, until the divine feminine comes up in its balance and we honor the divine feminine again, we can't become masters. We can't have our world move to the next level. And this is one of the critical reasons why Mary Magdalene and the awareness of the divine feminine, the women's movement, the 10 billion women marches, this is so important. It's not only important at a personal level for all the millions of women who are suppressed or oppressed or sexual slaves or legally binding married slaves at the age of 11 or 12 or 13 or sexually mutilated or all the crazy things that have happened. It's really important for the conscious awakening of men as well as women. And there are some really wonderful men out there that are supporting this movement. And actually, I've just got a chance to go see Eve Eisler's The Vagina Monologues. And believe it or not, the play before that was The Manologues. And there were these incredibly conscious men that were discussing the toxicity of the way that the patriarchy has depersonalized the female and objectified it just basically as a sex object or someone to raise the children or make the meals or to kick to the curb whenever they wanted to. And I just heard that in Russia, they've made the first time you beat your wife, you can't be prosecuted. You're given a pass of one time where you can beat her without any any legal repercussion. So, we're living in a crazy world where the patriarchy, the old patriarchy, the unaware male energy is fighting tooth and nail to maintain this suppressive control over the one half of the population, and that of course is women. And of course, if all women stopped having any sex with any men whatsoever at any time, maybe the world would change. But of course, there are wonderful men, and there are people who genuinely understand this balance on both sides of the equation and are working for it. So, and of course, if you're a servant or a slave, you probably don't have too much control over whether someone forces you to have sex or not. So it's a tough situation that we need to change on this planet. And Jesus actually says that he cannot return until the divine feminine is reinstated in the world, because it's what is necessary to open the heart. So this opening of the heart, this balancing of the planet is linked to the turning of the ages. As we know, there are 12 astrological ages. Each one is 2,160 years. I have whole presentations on this, and maybe we'll wind up doing another one of these presentations that talk about the processional cycles, and the evolution of consciousness in the cycles of time. But we're coming out of the age of Aries, which was very warlike for 2,000 years at the time that Jesus was born. And then we moved into the age of Pisces, which could have been a very beautiful age. Certainly Jesus was the avatar of that age. And he taught, love your neighbor as yourself. Forgiveness is the key. The kingdom of heaven is within. So these were the key messages. Some people did get it. There are very beautiful, both men and women, who did get it, like St. Francis of Assisi, or many of the Hildegard von Bingen, many of the hidden nuns and monks and hermits. But of course, the major power control didn't get it. So we sort of had a dominator model suppressing this softer spirit. Now we're moving into the age of Aquarius, and things are in the process of beginning to change. But we are part of that movement of change. We can't just sit back and hope somebody else does it. We actually have to be involved with it. So this is a very big conversation about how this is beginning to come back into the consciousness of the world in order to bring this Christed spirit back into the hearts of all of us. Now, the ancients knew that there were these cycles of time. And, this was not just, Hebrew Christian knowledge. This is ancient world knowledge. This is the Tao symbol from the Far East. And we see here, one current, we'll call this the female hidden inside of it. Some would say this is the male, because the male likes to think of itself as so bright and happy and sunny, and the female, the dark womb, is hidden within it. However you look at it, it's the same concept, basically. And here we have the opposite polarity with the other polarity. So we can say in an age where we're male dominant, we're female subdominant. Where we're age where we're female dominant, we're male subdominant. But there are ages where the male and females can come into balance with one another, and this is what the age of Aquarius is really about. This movement of going up and down like this is also very important, because it's connected with the movement of the solar system through time. About 11,500 years ago, Atlantis actually fell into the sea. That was about this point. They had just crossed below the galactic equator. And we had a lot of devastation from the Great Flood. We picked ourselves back up, and because the Anunnaki gods were here, a lot of them did not perish. They were able to help us rebuild civilizations, the ancient civilizations like Sumeria and Egypt and some of those great civilizations that did remain. And then, of course, there were also souls who went underground. That's a whole nother conversation, and came back up afterwards. We are now here. We've been starting our paths through the galactic center for about 500 years. At the time of the Renaissance, we were probably about here. So now we're here. We've got at least another 500 years to go. But during this cycle, we're more male dominant, and during this cycle, we're more female dominant. In other words, the goddess must rise. And as we can see, the patriarchy is just fighting tooth and nail to create every single transgression it possibly can, because it doesn't want to lose its power. It's afraid, and it's a sad thing that it's afraid, because the truth is we all come from the Divine Mother. She is unconditional love, and we all return to her, and she's in all things. And so if we could sort of let our fear go, it would be a different world. When Jesus talks about, and in Revelations they say, I will be a time, I will return a time, and then half of a time. He's talking about an age. So the age of Pisces is past, that's the time, and then a half a time. So probably about halfway through the age of Aquarius, these beings really will return. And many times they return actually at the beginning of an era, a 2,000-year cycle. We see Jesus appeared between Aries and Pisces. If you go back in time, Mithra appeared between Gemini and Taurus. Horus appeared at a much earlier age, I think between Cancer and Virgo. So I would not be at all surprised if these beings actually do reappear even in our lifetime. It's quite possible it could happen. And of course, this whole enthronement is really what we're hoping for. It's not the enthronement of a person. It's not about personality worship. It's really not. It's about honoring our own divine Christ itself, the male and the female within. So when we look at how Mary Magdalene has traditionally been presented for, until 1979, when the Catholic Church finally said, oops, sorry, we made a mistake. She wasn't a prostitute. We made a mistake. We should have corrected this earlier, but, only 1,1600 years worth of Catholicism has passed, where poor little Mary Magdalene was made into the fallen woman and the prostitute. So they took it all back in 1979. I don't know if you guys know that, but that's at least a nice thing. But most people don't know it, and they didn't know it until really the Da Vinci Code. Dan Brown's book, The Da Vinci Code, which came out, I think, in the 90s, really opened up this conversation about what was going on behind the scenes. And his fictional murder mystery story was based on his inspiration that he had gotten from a book called Holy Blood, Holy Grail. Now, this book was written by three authors, Michael Blanchett, Richard Lee, and Henry Lincoln. And it was a bestseller in 1982, and it became a BBC documentary as well. The authors actually believed that Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene, that they had children, that they all went to the south of France, or that Mary Magdalene and the children did, that they wound up probably in the Celtic Isles as well, and that basically the children intermarried into noble families. And if you remember, Lazarus wound up going and becoming one of the early deacons of the church in France. And so for many centuries, this group prospered. But then the Catholic Church, about, I think it was around 500 or 600 AD, decided it wanted to get rid of all competition. And so it made a deal with the heirs of the Jesus lineage, basically, that they knew that Jesus had children, that they would protect that line and bring that knowledge forth in perpetuity if they would support the Catholic Church. And so the descendants did agree, but then the Catholic Church betrayed them and murdered all but one. They forced the women heirs to marry into basically the usurper lines to control the bloodline, but one child escaped with one of the Knights Templars. And so this is what this book is based on. And there's a lot of really interesting evidence in it. I don't agree with everything they've said. Like, for example, at the very end, they sort of speculate that maybe Jesus didn't die on the cross. Maybe he got someone else to do it for him. That doesn't really jive with all the research that I've done. But I will say it's an interesting book, and there's some very serious research done because basically the overseeing body that had a charter from the Catholic Church in Rome for the Knights Templar was an order called the Priory of Sion. And so it is an interesting book, but basically what we realize in this book is that the lost goddess of Christianity, who's been maligned for so many centuries, I mean, centuries and centuries and centuries, was Mary Magdalene. And so when we begin to talk about who she really was and what she really taught, this is linked to the quest for the Holy Grail. You remember at the time of King Arthur, about 550 something, this is what we think, 550, 570, 530 AD in the Celtic lands, which of course is where the very first church in the whole world was ever set up by Joseph of Arimathea in 37 AD, shortly after the crucifixion. He went and took at least 12, Christian monks or males, and they set up a perimeter around the place where Jesus had studied when he was living in the Celtic lands. And they got as far away from the Roman Empire as they possibly could, and from the patriarchal Jews that were so oppressive at that time. And so there was a whole movement of Christianity that was really quite beautiful in the Celtic lands, and many believe that the Celtic lands are the real Holy Lands, and that some of the areas of the south of France are the real Holy Lands, and because that's actually where Mary Magdalene and where Jesus and the true original Christians lived and spread their message. And as we're going to see, Mary Magdalene taught a path of knowledge that was called the way, like Jesus's, but it was the way of the chalice. So this search for the chalice or the Holy Grail, which the Holy Blood, Holy Grail authors say is actually a search for the descendants of Mary Magdalene and Jesus. And if you remember again in the Arthurian story of the round table, round meaning the feminine, there were 12 knights plus Arthur, 13, where we heard that before, 12 disciples around Jesus. They were looking for the Holy Grail, and only the purest of the knights could find it. And in some stories, it's Galahad, the purest son of Sir Lancelot. In some stories, it's Percival. But basically, unless they could find that Holy Grail, that child, that sacred child, the land would die. the land would wither and die. That's the story of the King Arthur myth. And supposedly he has the Fisher King, which is the Christ, isn't it? The symbol of the Pisces fish. The Fisher King has a wound in his groin. Well, the groin's another word for his kind of private part area. And so what is this about? This is all about the lineage of the Christ child that's been lost. Where is the child, or where are the children of Mary Magdalene and Jesus? Are they hidden someplace in Scotland? Are some of the members of the Knights of the Round Table, were they protecting them? Were they looking for them? Did they have some of the original bloodline? So this is, again, one of the reasons this legend or myth won't die some 1,500 years later is because it's encoded as a myth, but it's actually based on something very deep that was hidden from most of the public. So let's take a look for a minute about what we do know about Mary Magdalene and what was taught in the Gospels. So first off, we know she was a female disciple of Jesus. And again, the Roman Catholic Church focused on all the male disciples, but there were also females. If you go through and read the New Testament, as I have, there were quite a lot of them. There was Joanna, there was Mary Salome, there was of course, Mary Magdalene, there was Mary the mother, there was Mary Jacobi, there was one called, not Pauline, anyway, there's one I think called Penelope. There's a whole bunch of them. But of course, they don't really want to give them much credit because, again, Jesus was living in a very patriarchal society. The male apostles felt like that they were the ones that had the power, which was true. They did. They had a lot more mobility than the women did to be able to come and go or to teach or preach than the women. But even in our version of the New Testament, the women are very, very marginalized. So we know that over time, once Jesus began his mission, there was some traveling to different villages, and the women would go and help tend the sick, and the men many times would go and help build structures or help with infrastructure problems within the village. And that's kind of how it went. Jesus, of course, usually wound up going to help tend the sick. And we see stained glass windows here of Mary Magdalene reading and tending the sick. We know that she was one of the three Marys. There was Mary the mother, Mary Salome, and Mary Magdalene, that all the Gospels talk about were at the cross at the time when he died. And here we have a stained glass window. Again, this long reddish blonde hair with Mary Magdalene looking very much like a girl. And this one at the foot of the cross. This is a much more solemn picture, but we can recognize Mary Magdalene by the long red hair. And here would probably be Mary the mother, where she's covered much as the Muslim women are today. And then there's another woman, Mary Salome. We just see two of them here. We know that in the New Testament, it was she and Joanne, another female apprentice or disciple, that went to the cave where he had been buried and found the stone rolled away. We also know that she went inside and found the linen wrapping on the funeral bier, and there was an angel inside the tomb, but there was also one outside that said, why do you look for, what are you doing here? And she said, I'm looking for my Lord. And he said, why do you look for the living among the dead? So the angels told her right then and there that he was still alive. And then we know that she was the disciple that first saw Jesus during the resurrection. And this was, of course, very, very famous. Scene, and there's lots and lots of depictions. Again, she has kind of the long reddish brown hair here, and here it's kind of pulled back, looking very more like the like the 1700s or 1600s style, but there are so many different paintings of this. And you see she's holding this alabaster jar. We're going to be talking about this alabaster jar, which of course she didn't have with her at that particular moment in time, but this marks her as Mary Magdalene, in case anybody wonders. So we also know that after the crucifixion, Joseph of Arimathea arranged their escape on a ship. He had ships because he was in shipping. He mined tin up in the Castellarides Mountains in England. And he had a lot of access to not only money but privilege. He was a Roman decurion, which was an honorary title that was bestowed on him because tin was used in the making of bronze weapons for the Roman Empire. So he was, highly regarded, had a lot of friends where he could come and go from the ports on a regular basis. So he managed to get Mary and Martha and Lazarus and about 12 disciples out, and they went to the south of France after the crucifixion. And we actually know this, and I talk about this and list all those disciples in my book on Jesus. So this is another depiction of that sea voyage where they wound up landing in the south of France, and some said they were led by an angel because, of course, that sea could be quite rough there in the Mediterranean. So these are the basic outlines of the things we've been told about her in the Bible. But what else do we know about her? Well, actually, I think we know more than we realize. But for many people, we've not been able to connect the dots really until now. For many, many centuries, the church told us that Mary Magdalene was Mary of Bethany. And in fact, she was Mary of Bethany. But then once they finally said she wasn't a prostitute, then they took it back and said, well, and we don't think she was Mary of Bethany. So that's not correct either. She actually was Mary of Bethany. Who is Mary of Bethany? Well, don't you remember? Mary of Bethany was the beautiful maiden that followed Jesus around like a puppy everywhere when he first began to teach. She was the younger sister of Lazarus and Martha. And in fact, if you remember the stories, Martha was always making food and Mary was always sitting at the feet of Jesus. Here's that chalice, by the way. Thought I'd point that out to you. And Lazarus was Jesus's best friend. And Martha was always scolding Mary because she was like, why don't you get up and work? And Jesus actually rebuked Mary and said, it's not about the physical food. It's really about the sustenance or the nurturance of the soul or the spirit. So, stop giving her a hard time. So there are other people who have put this together too. This is a book about Lazarus, Mary, and Martha. And there's some people who don't know if Mary Magdalene was Mary of Bethany, but I really believe she was. Let me show you some of the reasons why I believe this is true. Again, here is the same scene with the reddish blonde hair. She's sitting at the feet of Jesus. This is a beautiful stained glass window, and Martha's in the background acting as the older sister and probably, waiting on everybody hand and foot and wondering why no one's given her any help with the housework. But when we read about these stories, and in the research that I did for the Jesus book, I was kind of in the cave doing this research for about 3 years. I wound up reading a lot of hidden documents from the Vatican, and I do footnotes and bibliographies in the back of that book so that if you're interested, you can follow that same breadcrumb trail. But one of the documents that I found was a document about the Sanhedrin Council that sent a follow-up at, like 30 years after, I think when Jesus was about 27 or 28, and he had just returned from India, and he was spending a lot of time with Lazarus. This is before his mission ever began. And he was at Martha and Mary and Lazarus's house a great deal. And everywhere the Sanhedrin went, Jesus would always leave right before he got there. But the Sanhedrin interviewed, rabbis that were spending time with Jesus, and Lazarus and Mary and Martha and so forth. And what he learned was that Jesus would come, and he and Lazarus would go up and lie in the heat of the evening on the roof and look at the stars, and Jesus would tell Lazarus all about his travels, where he had been and what he had done, and Mary would creep up and listen to his every single word, just hanging on his word. And also found out a lot of other things. They said he could command the animals. Like one time a child got bitten by a snake, and he commanded the snake to literally draw the poison out. It was really interesting, and I have some of these things in my book. So, if you're interested, there are amazing stories I've included. Even in the Sophia book, I have about 5 chapters on the hidden teachings and things I found out about him that most of us don't know anything about today. But I thought this was great, where she's kind of like listening to his every word. We also have the story, of course, in the New Testament of when Lazarus died, and Jesus shows up 3 days after he died and raises him from the dead. And there are other writers who have talked about what they believe was going on where Mary came out. They believe that at this point, Jesus and Mary were betrothed to one another, but had not slept together, because the way that Mary acted was very much like a fiance or a bride that must await her husband's pleasure until he calls for her. And so it's, there's a lot going on here. But when I talk about why I think Mary of Bethany was Mary Magdalene, I want to show you some of these depictions through time where Mary Magdalene is shown with Lazarus and Martha. So her sister and her brother, and she's holding this sort of container that has different shapes and different pictures, but it's basically representing that alabaster jar that she used to anoint Jesus's feet. Here it is again. Mary is depicted holding the alabaster jar, and this is Peter, Martha, and a disciple called Leonard. So you see her coupled, Mary with Martha and Lazarus again and again, and she's holding the jar. So whoever's holding the jar is Mary Magdalene. So here we are again. This is the famous anointing ceremony where she anoints his feet with spikenard and his head with spikenard shortly before he goes into Jerusalem for Passover and then undergoes the whole crucifixion. And if you remember, there were disciples that rebuked her for this because the spikenard was so expensive, it was worth a whole 1 year's ransom. So how in the world did she get the money? Well, clearly Mary, Martha, and Lazarus of Bethany were from a wealthy family, because Jesus and his whole entourage, 20, 30, 40, 50 people, would come and stay in the courtyard around their house, and they would be fed by them. So they were one of the sponsors of his mission, financial sponsors. So of course they had the money to buy this anointing. As a result of this, Mary Magdalene became known as the woman with the alabaster jar. And in fact, there was a woman who wrote a book in the 1980s. She was an ex-nun, and she called it The Woman with the Alabaster Jar. Here's another one. This scene, in fact, is the only scene that appears in all 4 Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John of the Synoptic Gospels. And Jesus said forever after, she will be remembered for this. Basically make sure you write it all down. Well, there are very good reasons why he said this. And it's because it is a code to who she really was and what this ritual was really about, which we're going to take a look at in just a few minutes. Here is the blonde hair. Sometimes you see blonde, sometimes red. You can see this is a little faded. Here we are, Mary Magdalene. Here we are with the blonde, reddish hair. And here's Martha standing right behind her. This looks like Lazarus here. So we have that same Trinity. And this is all through, for, almost 1600 years, these paintings have been being made. So the question becomes, if she was Mary of Bethany, she was a very respectable woman. She certainly wasn't a prostitute. And she was highly honored by Jesus. And actually he called her the disciple that knew the all. So the question is, what have they not told us about her? So to do that, we have to look at some paintings and some stained glass windows that have made it to the Celtic lands. Because remember, Joseph of Arimathea and those original apostles went up there. So there's information in Scotland, Ireland, and England in the stained glass windows and the art that we don't see anyplace else in the world, because the legacy was a legacy that came down from the people who actually knew her. So here she is feeding children. Here she is with a book. So we know she was educated and she could read. Here she is again with another book. See the blondish hair, blondish red hair. Here she is with Peter. Now, Peter was actually asked to run the exoteric or the outer church. She was asked to run the esoteric or the inner church. And all the great mystery schools were like this. They had an exoteric or outer thing that taught morality and things like the Ten Commandments. And then they had an esoteric or an inner path to real wisdom and knowledge from people who were really more enlightened. So this is the last thing that the Roman Catholic Church or the patriarchal Jews were interested in, having become part of the institution of Christianity, that a woman of all things was the enlightened master that was asked to carry on the work of the male master. No, 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 this will not be allowed. So they had to find a way to kind of dispose of her and get her marginalized. Here we have Mary Magdalene, and she's with John, and she's looking pregnant. And we know she's married at this point because married women covered up their hair. Unmarried women did not cover up their hair as a rule. Mary Magdalene with Jesus and child. This is from a stained glass window at the Scottish Isle of Mull in Kilmore Church. And you can see here that she's definitely pregnant, wearing that Isis blue. And again, you see her hair. This is the full window. And this is the Isle of Skye, and there are many, many points I talk about. The Celtic Isles are very big in terms of Issa or Jesus. And again, if you're interested in this stuff, I would definitely suggest you pick up my Jesus book, because I lay it out. It's easy to read, and I've done the research. But this is actually up in the Scottish area, the Isle of Skye, and it said that one of their children was born on the Isle of Iona, the Isle of the Dove, and that's very interesting. And there are reports of Mary up there with a child named Jesus, not only Mary the mother, but later Mary Magdalene. So these reports are supported by physical evidence as well. One of these is an old stone cross in Cheshire, England, where Jesus is shown dressed in a short kilt. Amazing. The carving also reveals the Eastern Mediterranean motif of the grapevine, long associated with both the Egyptian god Osiris and Jesus's family lineage. And we can see there have been other wonderful writers that have written about this. George Jowett writes, tradition and written testimony assert that Jesus did abide in Britain, and while there created a temple of loving testimony to Mary. For over 1,000 years, it was commonly spoken of as the church built not by human hands. Let's think about that. I've been to England maybe 30 or 40 times. I love England. And Glastonbury was the place, the Isle of Glass. At one time, it was an island, Avalon. Now it's, the sea has receded, so it's now filled in with beautiful meadowland, but hills. The Tor is there. And there is a temple or a tower to St. Archangel Michael, and on it is written Jesus and Maria, like a couple. And of course, most people would say, oh, well, it's Mary. He's honoring his mother, Mary. But maybe he's not honoring his mother, Mary. Maybe it's Jesus and Maria, Mary and Jesus as a couple. And this has been there for centuries and centuries. It's very, very old. Now, when we think about for over 1,000 years, it was commonly spoken of as a church built not by human art. Well, what kind of temple or church could you build? What kind of temple could you build that's not built by human hands? It would be a child. This is what I meditated on. This is really what it comes to me, is that the temple that they built, the church that they built, is a consciousness that was embodied in their descendants, and of course eventually either destroyed or lost or forgotten, and thus the quest for the Holy Grail. Here in Yorkshire, England, we have Mary with child. This is not Mary the mother. She has black hair. This is Mary Magdalene. We see the same hair, and the child is fair. Here's Mary Magdalene again, Suffolk. Same kind of thing, more reddish hair here. Here she is in Norfolk, England. Blonde child. So she was the lost bride of wisdom. She was the wife and partner of Jesus. And unfortunately, she's been terribly maligned for a long, long period of time. She was, according to the Gnostics, Mary Sophia, an incarnation of the female Christ. So interestingly enough, even though we're going to see how she was maligned by the church, the Pope still wanted her blessing. This is a Pope with Mary Magdalene, isn't it? And here's her symbol of the Holy Spirit. And here we have the blonde hair and the blonde child. Very interesting. This would have been done probably, 500, 600, 700, something like that. So even though publicly they maligned her, they knew the secrets. The church knew the secrets. And this is what the authors of Holy Blood, Holy Grail contended all along, is that this was known in the hidden recesses of the church. So this Trinity of three Marys is a very interesting concept. Mary is connected with the word la mer, or the ocean, like the cosmic ocean. So in a lot of ways, it was more than just a name. It was really a title, and this is why there were so many Marys. It was linked to the triple goddess, the maiden, the mother, and the crone. And so here we see maiden, mother, and crone. In the Celtic tradition, maiden, mother, crone. Again, in the Celtic tradition, this goes, we've softened it in during the Renaissance, when there was a resurgence of this energy again, but we called them the three graces, is what we called them. But it's the same conversation of the three stages of the moon, the first quarter moon, the full moon, and the last quarter moon, the three stages of life for women. Nicholas Roerich, the painter I spoke about earlier, also knew a lot about these hidden secrets, and he encoded them in his paintings. And we see all sorts of information here. Here's our Trinity. Here it looks like, the divine, either Mary Magdalene or Mary the Mother. Here we have the Chi-Rho and the Pater, which is the patriarchy, but it's really a stylized version of the shepherd staff. So it's all linked to the ancient mysteries. Here we have the Divine Trinity. This is how the Boys Club avoided letting us know that the Holy Spirit was the divine daughter or the divine mother. We have the Father God, we have the Son God, and the divine feminine is in the center between them as a bird. So they don't tell you the Holy Spirit or the Holy Ghost is the divine mother. It would make a lot more sense. Divine Father, Mother, Divine Child. Anybody can understand that. That's how it was presented in all the ancient paths. So there is within the esoteric tradition, in the same way we have male and female, so we have a dualistic world, we also have a triune universe. There are three parts if you look closely enough. So there's the male, there's the female, but then there's the middle path. And we sort of see this. Here's, the two elephants on either side of Lakshmi. And Lakshmi, arising from the great cosmic waters, is the divine mother of unconditional love. She is the middle way. She's the path. Here we have the triune staff of Shiva, the transformer. Here's the Celtic triune symbol. Here it is as Horus, Osiris, and Isis, divine mother and father with the divine child. Here it is as the two pillars of awakening, representing many things, more than I have time to tell you in this particular presentation, but I talk about it at length in the very first discourse of the mysteries. But divine masculine and feminine, and the way or the path of mastery that lies at the center. The compass and the square, which is a Masonic symbol, is the same conversation. We could actually close this in and make it a triangle, close this in and make it a triangle, and we would have the Star of David. When we look at the natural world, the atom has three parts, doesn't it? It has a proton, has an electron, and it has a neutron. So it has a positive valence, a negative valence, and something in the middle. The galaxy has three parts. We have, the sun, we have the moon, we have the planets. We see this over and over again, repeated, repeated, repeated. Sun, moon, planets, or the star, we can call that the masculine force if we wanted to, or maybe it's the neutral force, and the moon is the female and the earth is the male, or the earth is the female, the sun is the male, and the moon is the neutral. So we see this triune aspect everywhere. This is also encoded in a lot of art. Look at this. This is in the quest for the Holy Grail. They have the three angels here. Same thing. Here's our Holy Grail cup, and here are three angels. Why is it three over and over again? We're going to take a look at that. We even see this in religious art. We have an angel to the left of her, the right of her, and here she is in the middle. And here's that alabaster jar. Here she is ascending to heaven, the angel to the left and right of her, and here she is with her long, beautiful, reddish blonde hair going up into heaven. So the Holy Grail was actually the combination of the female vessel energy, the male stem energy, joined together and grounded in the physical world. Okay? And many times you'll see this represented by the sun and the moon. And this is the symbol. You can see this is the moon that's covering the sun. It is the union of the male and female in groundedness that brings together mastery. Jesus called Mary Magdalene the woman who knew the all, the foremost of disciples or apostles. And of course, the woman with the alabaster jar, who's looking pretty troubled there, perhaps because she knows she's going to be maligned for the next 2,000 years. But what happened to Mary, that young maiden, in the years between Jesus going home from India and being with his family at 27 or 28, someplace in there, and then there's a whole period of time where he goes missing? And I talk about this in my book. Most of us think Jesus began his ministry at the age of 30 to 33, but that's really not true. There are many of the original texts that talk about him being at the very earliest. It would have been late 30s, early 40s, or mid 40s. In fact, in the Gospel of John, there's a passage where Jesus is saying, before Abraham was, I am. And the Jews look at him and say, are you kidding, man? You're not yet 50. Now, you might say that to a 40-year-old or a 45-year-old or a 42-year-old, but you're not going to say that to a 30-year-old. So Tertullian, one of the early church fathers, not one of my favorites, by the way, but he actually said, by making him 30 years old, we do him a great disservice, because everyone knows that life has these three phases of life, and it's in the sage period, the last period, that we really come into our own and our mission. In the early years, we're growing, we're learning, we come into manhood, and then eventually we become the sage and the teacher. And this was known throughout all of the ancient world. So there was about 7 years Jesus went and studied in the temples of ancient Egypt before he even came back. So what was Mary Magdalene, who was clearly younger than Jesus by, we don't know, 7 years, 8 years, 9 years? If she was, let's say, a young girl of 16 or something when he came home at 27, that would have been about a 10-year, 11-year gap. So where was she? Well, she was also studying. She was studying in the temples of Egypt and training to become a priestess of Isis. Where Mary, the mother, had been in Egypt and definitely was an initiate and was an Essene initiate, and also was initiated in some of the Isis traditions. Mary Magdalene became a full-on priestess of Isis. And it was this knowledge and this wisdom that she had that so offended the Hebrew patriarchs like Peter, that were really not interested in her being more knowledgeable. He wasn't used to women having that kind of sophistication in knowledge. Women were supposed to pretty much make your meals and have sex with you, and that was their job. You know, they were second-class citizens, and that's what Peter was really comfortable with. So she thus became known as the Magdala, Mary the Magdala. We call her Mary Magdalene, but actually the title was Mary the Magdala, which means Mary the Great. And we see her here with the cosmic egg in her hand, representing that she has understood the totality of the all of the universe. Now, the term Magdala also means watchtower, and it's associated actually with a lighthouse. In other words, someone who's holding the light. And we see again these wonderful artists who have depicted her holding this light, because she was put in charge by Jesus of the inner teachings of the church, which most of us know nothing about. A watchtower goes all the way back to the time of Isis and her half-sister Nephthys, who wore a watchtower on her head. Now, doesn't this also kind of look like a chalice? Isn't that kind of interesting? Kind of looks like a chalice to me with the bowl and the stem here. So what was the history with Isis and Nephthys? And I told you about Osiris, how Osiris was murdered. Well, Nephthys had been married to that mean old Set, who was the guy who did the murdering. And so she left him at that point. And of course, when Isis, her sister, became pregnant, she became a protector of the existence of Horus the child, because Set would have come and murdered the child. So the birth took place in the south of Egypt at an island known as Philae. Today you can go to this island where this beautiful, delicate temple of Isis still remains. You have to take a boat out there. It's just quite beautiful. I love the energy in Philae. And there were priests there that protected this secret for a long period of time. But Horus grew up on this island, and Nephthys was among the group of women or goddesses that decided to protect this Horus king that would eventually overthrow Set and return light and justice to the country of Egypt. Of course, Set ruled for about 350 years, but eventually Horus did get the country back. He ruled for about 300 years before he passed it on to the half-human and half-Anunnaki god descendants, or the demigods, and eventually it went to the humans around 3100 BC. And that's when we count Egyptian history as having started, because that's when we humans kind of came into power, came into control. So this watchtower of Nephthys marks Mary Magdalene as one of the order of the Magdalens that was awaiting the return of the Horus king. And we see here Nephthys with Isis. They're using their wings to protect this object. This object is called a tet or a dejet. It represents many things. It's the regenerative force of the universe. It's connected with the sun or the solar light. You can see the sun here. It's connected with, it's a symbol of the tree of life. It's a symbol of the Lord Osiris. And of course, we know that Jesus was, crucified was crucified on a tree. And so this link with the tree goes back very far. Osiris, for example, was his coffin was surrounded by a tamarisk tree, and so he's also connected with the tree of life. And this is a very deep subject, and I have DVDs on the tree of life, and maybe I'll do a whole presentation through Portal to Ascension on the tree of life. This is a wonderful, amazing, esoteric conversation to have, and the understanding of the tree of life, I think, is pretty critical to understanding a lot of the ancient wisdom. So throughout most of the times we see Mary Magdalene being depicted, she's wearing blue, Isis blue, or she's wearing blue and pink. And we see here Isis depicted the original mother and son with Horus, her child. And this, of course, is the template for what later became Mary, the mother, and Jesus, the son. And here we have this divine mother energy again in the Isis blue. This is actually Isis. And all of these are hermetic symbols that mean a great deal. But again, we see the two pillars, and she's in the middle, marking her as the way. She has the same headband of stars around her as Mary has here. It's really quite amazing. And the Book of Life, the beehive, this is a symbol of the great mysteries. There's a lot that I can say. Here are two columns, the Joachim and Boaz, which we're going to see again shortly in a minute. So Isis was also an incarnation of this divine daughter or divine mother principle. So the question becomes, if she was this great, incredibly conscious, aware, sweet, humble, wise being, why and how did she become vilified by the church? Well, this is because in the year 591 CE, our Common Era, Pope Gregory I, in his 33 homily, decided to disparage her character as a way of getting rid of her existence. And this is because once, you remember the contract I was talking about, when the Catholic Church went into an agreement with the lineage of Jesus, once they betrayed the lineage of Jesus, they then wanted to wipe the existence of Mary Magdalene and any children that could come to, let's say, claim the throne of Rome, claim power. They wanted to wipe this out of the history books. So they went after Mary Magdalene in particular to demote her, so no one in a million years would think that Jesus would marry a prostitute, which of course she really wasn't. So this is what Pope Gregory says. He says, she whom Luke calls the sinful woman, and by the way, Luke didn't know Jesus. Luke was a disciple of Paul's, who also didn't know Jesus. I want to point that out. She whom Luke calls the sinful woman, whom John calls Mary, we believe to be the Mary from whom 7 devils were ejected, according to Mark. So what did these 7 devils signify, if not all of the vices? This is Pope Gregory. It is clear, my brothers, that the woman previously used the unguent, the spikenard, to perfume her flesh in forbidden acts. This is complete extrapolation. First, Luke doesn't know Jesus, okay? He's repeating a story that he heard from Paul, who didn't know Jesus. And then they're saying that there's a sinful woman that's not even, supposed to be Mary Magdalene. But even if it was Mary Magdalene, I imagine Peter would call her sinful because she wasn't a good, I'd say a good little Christian, but a good little a Jewish wife. She was in fact a priestess of Isis, which they would have certainly looked at as being sinful in their eyes because she wasn't limited to the same theology that they were. So the next extraction is that she had this expensive unguent. So how did she get it? Well, clearly she must have gotten the money by perfuming her flesh in forbidden acts. So from this, we have this incredible derivative story of rumor. It's like the great lie. If we tell it big enough, loud enough, people in time will come to believe it. And so she was made out to be the sinful woman, which of course effectively got her out of the story, got the descendants out of the story, and it marginalized all women everywhere. I mean, there's not even any female priests or priestesses today in the church. No female cardinals, no female bishops or archbishops, no. The Boys Club has decided to maintain their absolute polarized sovereignty in this area, is as if women cannot become enlightened or they're not equal. And in so doing, they actually completely distort the core of what Jesus was teaching. Because as we're going to see, what Jesus was teaching was a sacred marriage, the marriage inside. And the church actually turned that message to say that he was the bridegroom and they were the bride. The church was the bride. I mean, it's just a very sad thing that it's all been so distorted. So essentially, this demoted women from playing any role of authority in the church for the last 2,000 years. So we want to look at a few things. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this from Dan Brown's book, but here is Mary, and she's in the exact opposite colors. Here's the pink and here's the blue. Here's the pink and here's the blue. And they make this complete V. You can sort of see here. And Leonardo da Vinci, of course, was an initiate. He knew all of the stuff and it was encoded. You see most of these guys all have beards. That one doesn't. But most of the rest of them have beards. And clearly this is not a bearded person. Look at these guys. Most of them have beards. But here she is hidden. And here's the chalice, okay, here. So again, here she is over here, the bearded club. This one looks like she's a female disciple or else a man without a beard. And here we have big jugs. Here's another one, and here she's serving. This is Reuben's Last Supper. Imagine you're commissioned by the church, and there were hundreds of years where the only way artists could make money was to be commissioned by the church. And so you know this knowledge, and you have to sneak her in. Here she is snuck in over his shoulder, barely noticeable around the boys' club. Here she is, terrible hairdo, if you don't mind my saying so. Okay, and we've got the little vase here. The looks like a wine beaker. Okay. Some of these guys aren't such great artists, but some of them were. So there are a number of people who've written about this connection that we've all been in the process of uncovering in the last 15 or 20 years. And the Goddess, the Grail, and the Lodge. I actually don't know if I've actually read this one, but there are, you can see the associations in the title. Okay, so the Holy Grail represents not only the lost teachings of Jesus and the legacy of what Jesus and Mary were speaking of, and probably their children, but it's also the knowledge of this hidden Sophia energy. And thus it becomes a quest for Grail mastery within ourselves. Even if these children, never existed, or if they perished in the years of decimation by the church and their witch hunts, the Grail mastery is really an understanding that we come to have about the path of mastery. So how is Mary connected to the Holy Grail? We want to look at a very important symbol. This is a symbol that was put by Joseph of Arimathea, representing Jesus's teachings on Chalice Well in Glastonbury. And Joseph of Arimathea is often shown here holding a staff with two cruets, okay? And it was said that he took the Grail with him. So he created the first church in England in 37 CE in the Isle of Apples, or Avalon, now the magical village of Glastonbury in the province of Somerset. So there's a lot of things to talk about with this. This is a longer conversation, but there's a lot to say about this. This was once dedicated to Horus, another savior god or incarnation of the divine. This is St. Michael's Tower, where Jesus and Maria's name is engraved. But Avalon had both a phallic tor, the masculine, and it also had a well. So female energy and male energy, upwelling energy and receptive energy that was dedicated to the Divine Mother. And there are two streams, and this is what they look like. I'm sure some of you watching this probably have been to Glastonbury. It's really an incredible place, very holy, very, very beautiful. And you can see these two streams, the white and the red, formed from different minerals, create this overlapping Vesica Piscis. And we see this shape again here. And if you remember, this is actually the shape of the isthmus that Jesus gave to us, the one symbol. And here's the well itself. So this, this Ichthus, this fish, is linked to the way. It's the way, it's the union of the masculine and feminine, the solar and the lunar, the day and the night. It's the union of all four elements, air, earth, fire, and water. And these are their ancient alchemical symbols. It's the intersection of the path between the two that merges both, that was known, in fact, as the Tao, or the way. And we can see again in this beautiful illustration by my girlfriend Sylvia Lorenz, the tree of life, the upwelling of the Tor, the chalice, and the sword, and the alignment with the star kingdoms, Aaronrod's silver wheel, as it was known in the Celtic tradition. And here we have the Ichthus. Now, traditional Christians think this means, may we be fishers of men. Or they might even go so far as to say, oh yeah, the age of Pisces was coming in. Although, of course, Christianity highly suppressed the knowledge of the zodiac and the cycles of time. But if you go to the Vatican, like I have, you'll see these gigantic star clocks that are really all, with the zodiac. So they certainly had this knowledge. And for a while, at least, it was allowed to be preserved. But it's not transmitted to most people now who don't know anything about the zodiac, or if they do, if they're traditional dyed-in-the-wool Christians, they might think it's demonic or something, which of course the stars are not demonic. So here we see the same Visca Pisces shape that was called the mandorla. Jesus is coming out of it. So what is he coming out of? He's coming out of the womb. That's the shape of a woman's womb, the doorway of the union between the masculine and the feminine. He has managed to join these two together in perfect union, and it's the doorway to the other side. This is the shape of the Tor. Is this extraordinary? Absolutely. And here, if we go back about 6,600 years, this is Mithra in the same doorway coming out of the cosmic egg. He's got the torch of illumination. He's got the same staff we see. Here's the zodiac signs. Okay, and this is the spiral of the Kundalini moving up his spine. And I really talk about how these solar lords come from time to time, and they can insert themselves into time, but they are beyond time. They are divine energies that periodically come in to try to help us out. And here's a really gorgeous picture of the Tor. Isn't that something? You can really see it here. And it's got 7 rings around it, representing the spiral of the 7 chakras. Just beautiful. So Mary Magdalene taught the way of the chalice, just as Jesus taught a path called the way. And we see here the fleur-de-lis, which became a shorthand symbol for this path, because we have the left-hand path, right-hand path, and the path in the middle, the path of mastery that combines and unites the male and the female together. And we see it again in this beautiful image of the tree of life with the masculine and the feminine. Here we see the beginning of life and the day. Here we see the night and the angel of death and time. So these 2 cruets were also representing, supposedly the blood and the sweat of Jesus. That's what it was supposed to be. But you see above his head the chalice, telling us that it is the combining of these 2 forces, male and female, together that brings us into mastery. And here we see another wonderful artist who has the red and the white chalices and the path of illumination, which is the path of the Holy Spirit, the Shekinah, or the female Christ, with the male Christ, bringing us into union. If we had any doubt, we can see the Star of David here. And this is like Isis and Nephthys on either side of that D-jet. Remember, that tree of life. So these are symbols that are overlaid layer after layer, century after century, for those who actually know what mastery is truly about. And our world needs to come into mastery, but we can't do it without either the male or the female. They have to be working together as partners. So this is a path of mastery that connects directly through the heart and the third eye. Similarly, Buddha taught the path of the middle way. Lao Tzu taught the Tao, or the way. Thoth taught the ancient way, or the way of balance. It's the path to mastery. Within the great mystery schools, in fact, underneath the Great Pyramid of Giza, there's a whole labyrinth of rooms and chambers that students were initiated in. And there was one called the Chamber of Reflection. And this was basically very similar to what was painted on the wall, which was, if you see the sun, masculine, moon, feminine, and the way of the middle is right here, which is the opening of the third eye. We could say it's the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, which when balanced, turned on, and joined together, allows us to get access to the kingdom of heaven. And we see the ladder to heaven, the keys to heaven, right here in the middle pillar. And this, of course, is the checkerboard squares of life, the negative and the positive, and all the crazy stuff we all go through down here just to be in the physical world. And by the way, the direction is east. Do you see this? Jesus says, when I return, I will come from the east. Horus always came from the east. So these great lords work together. So again, this path is linked to the tree of life. And here we see, we're just not going to do the whole conversation about the tree of life, because believe me, it's a huge presentation. But we see some symbols that we should pay some attention to. Why in the heck would a little friendly garter snake be wrapped around the tree of life, or the Kabbalah? Because this has to do with the Kundalini of awakening. And it has to do with the path of ascension. In the tree of life, this is Malkuth. This is the physical world we're in. This is the astral world. It's an intermediate realm when we go after death. And it's also connected to the emotional realm. It's called Yasad. But this is the direct path up to the heavenly realms. This is Tipperoth. This is the sun energy. This is the heart. This is always associated with the Christ energy here. And then there's a secret one right here that you don't even see, this connected with gnosis, or the death of the ego. This one's called Da'ath. And then this is the Trinity of the Divine Father, Mother, and then the Creator behind it all, who is beyond duality. So in this symbol, we're talking about the 7 realms of the lower worlds. You know, the soul plane, the Buddhic plane, the mental plane, the causal plane, the mental plane, the astral plane, the physical plane, and so forth. So this is the journey into, through the labyrinth, into the center of ourselves, where we awaken to the, let us say this is the shepherd, or the inner Christ, and then we're able to return back out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yes, of course there's 7, because there are 7 major chakras. So how do we do it? We do it through the heart. And this is, of course, what Jesus was teaching, what Mary Magdalene was teaching. And what have we discovered? We've now discovered that love activates our DNA. It lengthens it and it relaxes us, giving us access to what the scientists started off calling junk DNA, that we now realize holds our psychic powers, our psychic abilities, our spiritual abilities. And so, of course, if they told us it was junk DNA, we wouldn't pay any attention to it. So, you have to really look behind the scenes, because the patriarchy is so clever about keeping us dumbed down. So Bruce Lipton, who's a really wonderful biologist, professor, and PhD, wrote this book some years ago. It's an excellent book, and he's really talking about his discovery of how cells work and how this relates to the spiritual principles of the universe. What he basically has discovered is that cells can do one of 2 things. Either we open to love and we trust, or we protect. That's what cells do. If we're in fear, we close down and we protect. It's the same thing in relationships. You either open to love, or you find yourself being protective or defensive. If you open up, what happens is you actually access your DNA. If you close down, you constrict or contract your DNA, which means you have less access to who you really are. This means that when we access love, it allows us to open up to our connection with the universe, to realize that the universe is conscious, to begin to dream our lives, speak our lives, think our lives, and hook into this consciousness so we can manifest what we want to deliberately and consciously. As long as we're in fear, we can't do it. We can say it all day long, but it's not going to work, because the conscious mind is saying one thing and the subconscious is doing something else, and the cells are listening to what the subconscious is doing. So we have to find a way to, through some meditation, nature, calming music, mindfulness practices, whole brain thinking, which are all things that I really teach, to begin to find a way to balance ourselves and open up our hearts to this higher vibration of love, so we can access more of who we are. So, of course, this is not a power that the power elite wants us to have, because it would free us from their control. And Jesus actually, in the Sophia book I wrote, there are many secret teachings that most of us know nothing about. But one of the things he talked about is that we don't have to depend on a rabbi or priest or minister to connect with God. We can do it directly. Well, this was enough to get him killed in a society where people made their livelihood based on being the big poobah. And so if certainly we can honor people for their helping us, whether they're therapists or counselors or ministers or psychologists or doctors. Everyone deserves to do something they love and thrive. There's nothing wrong with that. And honoring them financially, absolutely fine. But it's another to say you're going to be thrown out of the kingdom of heaven unless you do it our way and pay us a whole lot of money. That's extortion, and it's really not true at all. So what is the meaning of the alabaster jar? Let's take a look at that. So this comes down to the ancient rites of sacred kingship. In the ancient world, this sacred kingship was everywhere, and it was practiced usually once a year. It was a very big deal, and it was practiced between the high priestess and the most pure male, the one that exemplified this sort of sacrificial energy, this willingness to give their life for the tribe. Now, they didn't murder a person like a sacrificial pig or anything. It was all symbolic. But there was a process where basically the queen or the high priestess actually anointed the young man's body. He was laid into a cave for 3 days and 3 nights like he was dead, and everyone mourned him. So this represented the one that gave his life to protect the tribe. And then 3 days later, he rose from the dead and he came out and everyone celebrated. And then he and the high priestess queen had sex together, basically, and they blessed the land with fertility. And this usually happened in the spring. So this is connected with the whole idea of the haragamas, or the sacred marriage. So this anointing act is related to something called the Banish Raita, or sexual marriage, meaning the wedding of kingship, which constituted the core of the royal inauguration. In other words, inaugurating this man, this pure man, as the Horus king. Well known in the ancient world, it was purged from the public records through ecclesiastical influence, because they didn't want us to put two and two together. Yet it remained implicit for many centuries in the literary tradition. And you can see the sacred marriage here between the man and the woman, male and female, black and white, lion and eagle, all the polarities that bring us together here, the hands of God over the couple. Okay, and what is the secret to going up to heaven? It's love. Here's Cupid. Now, Cupid's romantic love, but it's still love. And by the way, you should see, look, she's holding the chalice. Do you see this chalice right here? Very interesting. So this goes back to a period of time, thousands of years ago, where there was a great queen named Ishtar, who was very much in love with a king named Dumuzi or Tammuz. And they dated, fell in love, got engaged, and to be married. And so she was an Anunnaki. He was an Anunnaki. So this goes all the way back to the time of Sumeria. And then it wound up playing out in many different cultures. Here is actually a depiction of Dumuzi and Ishtar, and their poetry, their remnants of it still exist. Very beautiful, erotic love poetry. Here's Dumuzi. He's got a star above his head. He's on a lion. And, you know, the lion was always connected with Jesus, wasn't he? Well, this predates Jesus by thousands of years. Here's the tree of life, the palm tree. So a lot of the symbols that have come down to us come from an earlier age. So the rites of Ishtar and Tammuz were actively practiced all across the Mediterranean, the Celtic, and the Hebrew worlds for thousands of years. And we see, again, this whole melding. Why were they practiced? Because they understood it had to do with the fertility of the land. It had to do with the health of the tribe. It had to do with the balance of the yin and yang within us all. Here is a beautiful hermetic image that all has to do with the partnership, the lion and the unicorn, the male and the female, the two pillars, the moon and the sun, and that allows us to connect with our angelic twin. The angelic twin is a very big concept. The white stream and the red stream. Here's a white dragon and a red dragon. And, you know, here's the chalice where the angels are pouring one water into another water goblet. And the fool, this is the initiate at the beginning of the knowledge that says, you know, I know nothing. And the caduceus here with the raising of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So this is a loaded image that's just incredibly beautiful. So these are just a few of the examples of world saviors that have died on the tree of life. Tammuz, Adonis, Attis, Odin in the Norse, Quetzalcoatl in the South American, Osiris in the Egyptian, Krishna in the East Indian, and many others. And this is actually Tammuz, or actually it's on the tree. And Isis and Osiris in Egypt. Here is Osiris as the sacrificial king, and her wanting to bring him back to life through the power of love. Here it is as Dumuzi, the sacrificial king in the cave. So the anointing of the spikenard by Mary Magdalene marks Jesus as the next Horus king, recognized by the Magdalene order, and it also marks her as the high priestess who is able to anoint him. So where else do we see these anointing ceremonies? This is in Egypt. Here are the two priests. They're anointing the king. Here is Horus and Thoth anointing the king, very much like the same kind of oil jar that we saw before. And these are symbols of eternal life. So this marks Jesus as the Horus king that that 5 different groups were waiting on, and Mary Sophia as the anointing queen, or the partner, the marriage partner, the companion, as the book of the Gospel of Thomas says, the male and female Christ. So Isis, as Isis became the widow of Osiris, so did Mary become the widow of Jesus. And this is why they were both linked to the Black Madonna, the one that had to go into hiding, the one that's unknown by most of the world. And of course, the Freemasons were known as the sons of the widow. So it's a play on both aspects, because in truth, these beings could have been the same souls that reincarnated and returned to play the same mystery drama out again. So where else do we see these symbols of union? Well, throughout all of Hermetic philosophy. Look at this. This is the moon. This is the sun. Male and female in balance. Here, you remember St. Francis of Assisi and Clare, brother sun, sister moon. This is the union of the sun and the moon here as we arise from, again, the Vesica Pisces, which just kind of looks like a bunch of rays. Here we are again with the 2 columns of Joachim and Boaz, with the sun and the moon. This is back at the time of the Roman Christian era. The sun and the moon, sun and the moon, sun and the moon. So these symbols, there are a number of symbols that can play this out, sun and moon here, but the 2 columns and the path in between is the way of the return. And of course, the compass and the square were a shorthand version of this. We see this in the Freemason apron here. And of course, this is actually, this ivy becomes like our DNA, or like our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. Here we are again. These are like the 2 winged Isis and Nephthys, solar and lunar energies within the feminine. And we can see these are actually like Sephiroths, very much like the tree of life. So the people who created these things, sun and moon, the opening of the third eye, the inner temple of the adium or the adium that we must create within ourselves if we're to gain mastery. These artists actually, many of them were initiates, and they knew. The great temples of wisdom, you can see again these two columns. This is, I'm sorry about the degradation of this image. It's a very low resolution, but I wanted to put it in because it has the two columns, and who's in the middle is Isis. And what you don't see back here are the beehives, the little bees that later became the fleur-de-lis in the French aristocracy. That was all about the Merovingian dynasties of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. So again, it's the doorway of initiation passing through the center that represents the middle path, you know, that leads us from the physical world up into these higher dimensional realms. And of course, it's what the Tao actually means. The Tao is a term that means the way, and it's showing us the way of mastery is the union between the two. The Star of David is another one that beautifully represents it, and you see how it fits totally within the flower of life. Really great. And here we see in the flower of life, the Kabbalah, the tree of life, fitting exactly over the flower of life design. And when we take the symbols for the male and female and combine them here, and these symbols are actually connected with the symbols for the four elements: air, earth, fire, and water. So it's the merger and the mastery of these four aspects within ourselves: the mental air, the physical earth, the emotional water, and the fire, which is the ego. And of course the seven torches of illumination, which is what? The seven torches from the menorah are really the seven chakras of the body. So every teaching has had an exoteric aspect, which is what most people know, the simple version, and then an esoteric. And the esoterics don't disagree. They're all really very beautiful and very wise. And I honor all of these great traditions. And the more we could bring ourselves together in union, understanding that the sages throughout all the ages have had this knowledge, the better off we'll be, and the greater world unity will create. This union, of course, ultimately results in the awakening of the Merkaba field. The Merkaba is an energy body that we can soul travel into the higher dimensions. And Jesus even tells us that when you make the two into one, so that you make the male and the female into a single one, in order that the male is not made male, nor the female made female, when you make the two eyes into one eye, then you shall enter the kingdom of heaven. And that's from the Gospel of Thomas. And of course, he's talking about the left and right sides of the brain, something that I've just released a couple of short YouTube videos on, and I'm actually beginning to really develop a program on this where I'm teaching people how in workshops to activate the two sides of the brain. And so maybe if any of you are interested in this, this is really great if you've had any falls, car accidents, post-traumatic stress disorder, you know, knocks in the head, any kind of trauma like that, physical or emotional or mental trauma, we can have sections of our brain chemistry turn off. So by activating the two sides and joining them together, not only are we beginning to play with the full deck again, or we have more access to our creativity and to our ability to deal with day-to-day problems and stresses, but we're also opening up our spirituality and our spiritual eye. The left side is the mental, logical part, very more fear-based and just defensive, but very, very good for organization and groundedness in the world. This is the masculine side. The feminine is more creative and playful. It's better at communication and empathy, intelligent listening, and thinking outside the box. And so obviously there are times when we need both of these, and together they're perfect. And together they begin to open our inner sight. And this, of course, is the middle path that leads to wisdom and the path of Grail mastery and balance that Mary Magdalene was trying to teach. Now, I want to spend about 15 slides now, sharing some of Jesus's and Mary Magdalene's wisdom. These are actually among 250 sayings that the Gnostic Christians collected that Mary Magdalene shared, that they wrote down. Just like there are books of Jesus's teachings, there is a book that contains her teachings, and I speak about this and quote a lot of these in my new book, Return of the Divine Sophia. So she said, the Divine Mother is light, and she is also darkness. She is the saint, she is the sinner. Angels and demons are images in her, as are the gods and all the archeons, yet she is beyond all these. Know her in all things, and you will be free of bondage, even as the anointed is free. Anointed is the Christ. Christ means anointed one, just so you know. Until you know the darkness of Sophia, you will not acquire her light. Unless you die and are reborn of the Mother Spirit, the knowledge of the resurrection will elude you. And look, she's holding a chalice. What a surprise. Now we know why. It's a symbol of that mastery and that unity. She goes on to say, Kali Kalu appears black to those who do not know her, yet to those who love her and draw near, the Black Madonna, right? The womb of creation. She is white brilliance. Her image is as the starry night sky, and the light of the heavens and the supernal abode are in her. To pass beyond, you must enter her embrace, even as the Lord embraced her. Then through the daughter Sophia, you will acquire knowledge of the Mother Sophia, the Queen of Heaven. She goes on to say, even Lilith are one woman, and she is a supernal emanation. If a woman knows herself, she will know the Holy Woman, just as if a man knows himself, he will know the supernal Adam. To acquire this knowledge, you must be single, which is to say undivided. Again, we're talking about the union of these two aspects. And of course, Lilith was made into the disobedient woman because she wouldn't assume the missionary position. So there's just been so much bad, let's say, as they say, instead of saying lies, what do they say now? False press or false media or false truth or lies. But there's so many lies that we've been conditioned with. We have to really take a look behind the scenes, pull back the curtain. Mary Sophia said, the Logos, or the Word, which is the sound current, emanated into the world for the redemption of Sophia. If the redemption of Sophia is not received in the world, then the world is not redeemed. So you can think also of Sophia as our hearts. If the redemption of the heart is not received in the world, if the divine feminine is not received in the world, then the world is not redeemed. This is a really important thing. Sophia received the Logos, the template, the word, and those who cleave to Sophia have to receive the Logos, and they are redeemed. It is Sophia in you that receives the Logos and is saved. Now that's interesting. So it's the quality of wisdom in you, the heart in you, the divine feminine in you that receives the Logos and is saved. Mary Sophia says, God the Father entered into the image of the Son, but the world was overwhelmed by the great supernal glory. Therefore the Son imparted to the Mother Spirit, and God the Mother has entered into the image of the daughter to nurture the little ones until they grow wise. The light entered, but was too bright, and so the fire comes to purify, so that all might be sanctified to receive the true light. Everything shall be accomplished in due season, and it is the Mother Spirit that will accomplish everything. Now that's a very serious statement. It's the Mother Spirit that will accomplish everything. So they're talking about, the receptive energy is the female. How can we receive this spirit into our hearts is through opening to our hearts. As long as we egoically think we know everything, then we can't receive anything, can we? Whether it's love or money or success or wisdom or knowledge. She goes on to say, a disciple asked Mary, when will the second coming occur? Mary said, it can happen at any time, anywhere, when you least expect it. It is the mystery of the perfect aeon. An aeon is the overlighting being that came at the beginning of each new age. Like right now we're moving into Aquarius, so we're expecting one of these aeons, I'd say in the next 100 years. Jesus was, for example, the aeon of his age. So Mary said, it can happen at any time, anywhere, when you least expect it. It is the mystery of the perfect aeon known only to the living Father, which he will reveal in the mother in due season. Therefore, be ready and live without regrets, so that when it transpires, you will be among the living. Among the living, they're talking about among the conscious. We could say that. Instead of sleepwalking through your life or thinking it's all about money, power, and sex, you'll be among the conscious, those who have awakened. She goes on, before the bride is received, she must be rejected. This is Mary Magdalene saying this. And before the second coming, there must come a time of great darkness. I would say that the Inquisition counts. That was about 650 years of about, what do they say, 5 to 9 million women. And in fact, I discovered in my statistics and writing my last books that it was something like 50 million people that have been put to death by the church. Now, I don't mean to beat on the church, because the church has done a lot of wonderful things, and there are a lot of great people involved with doing wonderful things within the church. But there were many centuries of great darkness where truth was suppressed and books were burned, and mastery was definitely not on the agenda. It was more like obedience. And so we're coming back around, thank goodness. And I think we seem like we have a lovely Pope now, and John Paul was really great. So please don't misunderstand me. I do think that religion and spirituality, as long as it comes from the purest place of the heart, can be a support system for all of us, and a channel of getting out wisdom to others. But it has been abused in the past. She goes on to say, until the second coming of Christ, the wisdom of God shall not be received. When the bride is received, know the second coming is near. Now, that's very interesting. So the more we can bring this divine feminine movement up for both men and women, the more we'll heal our planet. And the more we can open that space to allow that Christed energy to begin to indwell our world and our hearts. Now, these are teachings from Jesus, or Issa, as he liked to be known in many countries. He says, reverence woman, mother of the universe. In her lies the truth of creation. She is the foundation of all that is good and beautiful. She is the source of life and of death. Upon her depends the existence of man, because she is the sustenance of his labors. She gives birth to you in travail. She watches over your growth. Bless her, honor her, defend her. Love your wives and honor them, because tomorrow they shall be mothers and later progenitors of a whole race. Their love ennobles man, soothes the embittered heart, and tames the beast. Wife and mother, they are the adornments of the universe. Imagine if that had been left in our Bibles. Imagine if preachers had been preaching that for the last 2,000 years. Imagine if men who said to be Christian or Jewish or Arabic actually were living by these laws. We wouldn't have spousal abuse like we have it now. From the unknown life of Jesus Christ, he says, as light divides itself from darkness, so does woman possess the gift to divide in man good intent from the thoughts of evil. Your best thoughts must belong to woman. Gather from them your moral strength, which you must possess to sustain your near ones. Do not humiliate her, for therein you will humiliate yourselves. And all which you will do to mother, to wife, to widow, or to another woman in sorrow, that shall you also do to the spirit. That's quite a statement there. So the disrespecting of the female in this way does not do any good for the advancement of any man's soul. In the Gospel of Philip, Jesus tells us truth is the mother and knowledge is the father. In the Gospel of Thomas, he tells us, in the three heavens there are merely gods. Where there is the Father and the Mother, I myself am with him. Now, there is a gospel that has been found in part. We're still hoping to find a whole complete version of it. It's called the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. It was found in Egypt in 1896. It is now in the care of the Berlin Museum. First translated in 1955 from the Coptic into the French by Jean-Yves Leloup, a wonderful Jesuit priest and a marvelous writer who's written many wonderful enlightened books by my same publisher, Inner Traditions. It's 21 pages long, but unfortunately, pages 1 through 6 are missing, and 11 through 15 are missing. So it's a story about an event that happened with Mary Magdalene and the apostles after the crucifixion. And so we only have portions of it, but we've been able to gather some very interesting information from this. These documents are believed to have been in clay pots around 350 years after, into the last 2 millennia. The writings themselves are believed to date back to at least the early part of the 2nd century. Now, in this Gospel of Mary Magdalene, basically Jesus has died. The apostles are all mourning, and so they are turning to Mary because she was closer to Jesus than any of them. And Peter, who was, has said things like, women aren't even worthy of life. He must have been pretty desperate to turn to Mary. He says, "Sister, we know that the teacher loved you differently from other women." Well, that sounds to me like, married or at a much deeper level. "Tell us whatever you remember of any words he told you, which we have not yet heard." So she goes on to tell them about this vision she has when she's praying, that Jesus, the teacher, appeared to her. And she says, "Lord, I see you now in this vision." And he answered, "You are blessed, for the sight of me does not disturb you. There where is the noose lies the treasure." So there's a lot of conversation, and there has been in theological circles, about what the noose is. Is it the higher self? I think it's the doorway. I think it's the doorway into these higher worlds. Then I said to him, "Lord, when someone meets you in a moment of vision, is it through the soul that they see you or through the spirit?" The teacher answered, "It is neither through the soul nor the spirit, but the noose between the two which sees the vision. And it is this which," and then the pages end. We don't know what he says. And so what is the noose? And so I want to just propose to you that the noose is this incredible doorway that joins between the two, as he said. And of course, it was the one symbol that he really left us. And we see this turned into, rather than calling it the Vesica Piscis, the church calls it the Mandorla. But we see Mary coming out of it. We see Jesus. We see beings like Mithra coming out of it. Here's the female cosmic crater, or female Christ, or the Mother God. It's the shape of our chakra that is our third eye. This is what that chakra looks like. It's the awakening of the inner consciousness. It's the awakening of our connection with our inner self. And of course, it's the union of the Divine Father and Mother that is the shape of the womb that births all of creation. It is also the shape of the cosmic egg, said to exist, on the cosmic waters of life before there was any of these lower planes. And when it opens, it becomes the lotus blossom. And when we look around, we see that many things are in this shape. This is the shape actually of a galaxy. This is the envelope around. Here's the plane of the galaxy from the side. Here's the shape inside of a Ankh, a symbol for unconditional life. Here it is as the seed syllable, or the word or the sound that sets everything in motion. And here it is as the Ithkas that Jesus left us. And in the Egyptian teachings, it was said that what emerged from this cosmic egg, there were conversations about what emerged first. Some said it was Thoth, or thought. In other words, the thought of God. Some said it was light, or the Christ, or Ra, that emerged. Some said it was truth, or Ma'at, cosmic truth, that from which everything grows. And so the mysteries, had these conversations about the depth and breadth of it all. This connection with the noose allows us to join with what's known as our angelic twin. And I speak a great deal about the angelic twin and the discovery of this in my new book that comes out in the fall. And I hope to do some programs around that, and hopefully some at conferences and so forth. So if people are interested in having me come speak, in their hometowns, I'm open to doing that. This allows us access into the inner realms and into connecting with our higher selves. This is, in fact, what the sacred marriage is for. It's not only for balancing our world and managing things better in this world, but it's also for accessing the higher world. And this is what Jesus and Mary Magdalene's inner marriage, sacred marriage, spiritual marriage represents. It's the male-female balance. This is the male flame, the female flame, and the trifold flame of the Sacred Heart that leads to the union between the two. the union of dualities, the merger of these coming together as one, in the cycles of time and the fullness of the cycles of time. Here's Isis and Horus holding up the universe, Isis and Horus holding up the universe again and again and again. And here are the zodiac constellations that bring us at last to that sacred marriage, or that hierogamos that Mary Magdalene called the way of the chalice. So I want to just mention to all of you, that's the end of our presentation. We've got about 3 more slides. I am going to do a trip to the south of France. I did this once before, about 10 years ago, but I'm looking at doing a trip this fall, October, November, and if for some reason I may wind up being in Ecuador in November, it looks too intense, we may put it off to next spring. But I'm only going to take about 10 people because we're going to be staying in these charming bed and breakfast places. We're going to go to the place where Joseph of Arimathea took Mary Magdalene and Mary, which is on the coast of Sainte Marie de la Mer, where the white horses and the black Madonnas is the home of the black Madonnas. We're going to go to the sacred cave. You can see the cave behind these words. It's the cave where Mary was said to have lived in the last years of her life. Lucette Baum, there's actually a monastery very close by that's been preserved and kept by pilgrims for 2,000 years. We're going to go to Carcassonne, which is where the Knights Templars hid their treasures, the treasures of King Solomon's temple. We're going to be staying in Rennes-le-Château. Rennes-le-Château is all involved with the hidden mysteries and where Mary Magdalene was. We're going to wind up going to the Cathar Castle, which is high on a hill of Montsegur, where the last of the Cathars wound up having these secrets, including a book called the Book of Love that was supposedly written by Jesus or by John, that was Jesus's words that the Cathars had. And of course, the Roman Catholic Church wanted this desperately to be able to suppress it. This is really a beautiful, beautiful tour. It's probably going to be something like 9 days. And we are probably going to do an extension from there for anyone who wants to go to Paris to go see Notre Dame, Le Sacré-Cœur, Montmartre, that whole area. So I'm just putting that trip together now. But because I have such limited space, if you are interested, by all means, please contact me and email me, and I'll put you on a list where I have your name and phone number and so forth. And those who are interested, I've done over 6,000 soul readings for people all around the world. If you're interested in DVDs, the Mystery School readings, or soul work or clearing work, by all means, you can call me directly, or you can contact me through my website, and my email is Tricia McCannon 1111. Now you know why. It's the Pillars of Knowledge 1111 at yahoo.com. You're very, very welcome to do that. I'm home until the end of this month. I go to New York City. If any of you are in the Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York area, I'm going to be at the Edgar Cayce Center the very first weekend of April, which is it's Friday, March the 31st, and then Saturday and Sunday, all day, speaking about Atlantis and where we are now in terms of America and the changes that we're going through now, and the connections between where we were dropping below the galactic equator, where we are coming up to the galactic equator, and how we're at similar but different points, and how critical it is for us to really help to work together in creating the rising of this divine feminine spirit to awaken the masses. And I think that actually sometimes I think Donald Trump is the perfect person, because he's been acting in such a sort of a challenging way that it's awakened a lot of people to want to protect the environment, to protect the earth and the waters, to protect the old people, the young people, the children, the women. So, it may be in a strange sort of way, he may be helping to make America great again, despite despite everything. And so I'm sort of at a place where I believe that there's a movement going on that is critical for us to be a part of, and not just be couch potatoes sitting on the side watching everybody else. And I thank all of you so much today for joining us. And I am going to be doing a presentation at Neil's conference in April. I'm not sure what it's going to be, but it's on the Ancient History Day. And I'm going to wind up also being involved in, gosh, okay, let's just see if the screen share is closed. So I don't know if you guys can still see me. I hope that you can. I'm also going to wind up, pardon me?
We can see you.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. I'm also going to wind up doing a program probably, this year I'm finally getting around to doing some webinars, and I'm so appreciative to Neil and Portal to Ascension. He's a great guy, real pure in his heart and intention, and he's archiving these webinars. So if you want to go back and see it, you can, or if you sign up, see I'm going to teach it, sign up for it by all means, and even if you can't see it at the proper time, you can go back and see it. But we've done one on the lost years of Jesus, and one on the Anunnaki gods and angels, one on the fairies and strange archaeology and giants. And so I'm actually trying to do one almost every month this year so that we can really get a body of work together. And please pass the word if you don't mind, and let people know, because sometimes I wind up going underground, writing a new book, and it's hard for me to come out and teach. But I'm in a place right now where I'm developing a new body of work that you guys haven't seen yet. And it's such a pleasure for me to share some of this body of work with you that I have spent many, many, many years immersed in, and to finally get a chance to share it. So I hope you've all enjoyed it. And I think our web chat is open. So if anybody wants to write me questions or comments, love to hear from you. And by all means, please feel free to contact me after this is over. Okay, so Lauren, I see, has written a question saying, regarding the dove icon, would the owl be a valid alternative? For example, the lions and owls at the feet of Inanna. Oh gosh, okay, I can see you're very aware. The owl is a different shamanic symbol, Lauren. It's about the clairvoyance. There's an order called the Order of the White Owl that was an off-planet order. Athena belonged to it, Inanna belonged to it, Diana, Artemis belonged to it. You can see it, but it's about the clairvoyance. So it's a different symbol. Still important, still very meaningful, but it's a different symbol altogether. I'm a member of the Order of the White Owl because I've been a clairvoyant since I was a little girl. But they have different meanings. I hope that answered that one. Let's just see who else has asked a question. Anybody? And I think you can type it in here for me, or if you want to jump in, Neil, you certainly can.
Sure. We don't have any questions coming up yet, but if anyone has questions, please type them in the chat box or in the Q&A section.
Right, and I know I ran through that presentation because I'm always afraid when I have so many slides that I'll never get to the very end of it, or that I'll run up and run over. And so I must have gone so quickly. I'm really proud of myself, boys and girls. I'm only about 2 hours and 20 minutes into it, so that was great for me. Those were about 260 slides you just saw. So I know some of you may be jumping up and running to the bathroom at this very moment, but we can close early, but I'm certainly willing to stay in chat if anybody wants to ask any more questions. I guess we can't hear them, can we, Neil?
No, we can't hear them, but we have another question from Donna. Can you tell us about the Sophia group?
Are you talking about the one that I'm talking about starting? Yes, I assume you are. So about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and this is how my work comes. I get directions from above a lot. And I don't write a book until I get directions, because it's like I work with a team on the inner planes, and every book I have written has had a different team. For example, when I was writing the book on Jesus, Jesus was in my house, and these masters, these solar lords, were in my house for 3 years, waking and sleeping. In fact, I slept in the guest room, which is, I'm in my office, and so it's a Jack and Jill bedroom and bathroom. I slept in my guest room for 3 years because they were waking me up at all hours of the day and night, appearing in my room, and so forth. When I was working on the Return of the Divine Sophia book, when I would draw the illustrations for that book, for 4 to 6 hours while I was drawing that illustration, that aspect of the Divine Mother would come in and be in my body. And it was the sweetest thing. And each one of them were different. And then when I was done, they would move off. And so that was the team. And so what happened about 4 weeks ago was I had a, oh, someone's calling. I had a whole nother download come in. Let me just tell these people, please call me back in about 30 minutes. I'm actually in the middle of a webinar. Thank you. Bye. That was fast. So I woke up and I thought, you know, Sophia Rising. For 1.5 years, I have been hearing in my head, Sophia Rising, Sophia Rising, Sophia Rising. And I thought, okay, what am I going to do with that? What are you talking to me about? And suddenly it was a website that becomes a resource for many different aspects of how we can become involved. And I'm actually working with a web designer now about putting it together. It'll probably take us a couple of months. But I'm a member of maybe 20, 30 different organizations that are about trying to help the planet. And so these organizations are helping the animals, helping the waters, helping the oceans, and so forth. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel for those. There are good, wonderful people that have spent many years working to be heard and to make a difference at a social, political, economic level. We can, contribute our $20 or get as involved as we want to with those. But I'm actually going to have do a book called Sophia Rising, 33 Visionaries Who Are Changing the World, where I'm going to feature people who are doing work specifically for the planet, both men and women, because there are great men out there as well as women, and I really want to honor them too. The more of them we can get, the better it'll be. And so this book would come out next spring. I'm in the very early days right now of making my list and doing my research about who I would like to really feature or sponsor. And then we'll probably wind up doing some classes, maybe some webinars, and setting up Sophia circles all over the world that can be a part of this movement. But I'm in very early days, and I'm very open to anybody who's, feels moved to want to talk to me about it. Because, like last week, I've had a client in from New York for the entire week. So I had to take a break from everything I was doing because I had a client that, was here, and I was working with them all day, every single day, and they flew out yesterday. So, I see clients and do readings and sessions in between writing books, doing DVDs, creating websites, and basically being on the mission to try to help pull us together so that the more of us that are on this page, we can find out who each other are, we can talk to one another, and we can assist one another in this vision because we have strength in unity, basically. So someone else has written me so yes, Donna, by all means, if you're want to connect with me, or any of you, you've got my phone number, you've got my email, you can email me and put in the tagline the Sophia Rising Project, or and you can also call me starting Monday. I'm usually work till about 7 o'clock at night. After 7, I turn into a pumpkin. So figure out your time zones. I'm on the East Coast. If you call me, you're 7 and you're on the West Coast, I won't want to talk to you at 10 o'clock at night. Who else has written me? Marga, I see. Okay, good. I watched and listened to you from my visit in Chartres right now. Oh my gosh, really? Chartres Cathedral, she's there. The labyrinth is laid into Chartres Cathedral. Now, she probably also knows this, but this is one of the great temples that was created by the Templars. There was in the 1100s, there was a whole movement of this knowledge that was set into stone. Much as in ancient Egypt, a lot of this ancient knowledge is laid into the crumbling foundations of those ancient monuments. Chartres Cathedral is incredible, and it was originally, they said it because there was I think an oak tree where they found a statue of Horus and Isis in the oak tree, mother and son, and this is what it was built on. And Chartres is beautiful, and for a long time they would not even move the chairs to let people walk the labyrinth. But I took a group there, and they had just started allowing us to walk the labyrinth. A lot of these ancient temples are built with a stone, limestone and granite. And limestone is a water stone, so it's female. Granite is a fire stone, so it's masculine. And there's, let us say, an alchemical technology about using stones in a particular way to create this vibrational resonance chamber that activates the initiate. And so let's see, I'm in Holland. Let's see, from my visit in Chartres right now, I'm in Holland. Feels quite special to me. Love your presentation. Marga, thank you so very much. Where are you from? Are you from the States? Are you from Europe, or where? And by all means, I'd love to have some pictures. If you want to send me some pictures of the beautiful temples and buildings and stuff, that'd be great. Okay, Linda, this was a beautiful presentation. I have some questions about the energy. It seems to be escalating around the recreation of the Ark of the Covenant, not by forces of light, but rather the suppressor forces. Oh, that's well put. Very diplomatic of you. Is there any truth in this? If so, can we focus our commitment to balancing our own masculine and feminine energies and clearing and releasing our own shadow help to counter this? Bless you and your multitude of gifts. Thank you so much, Linda. Well, I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about with this, but let me just say in general that for quite some time, the dark forces, we all know there's dark and light. So even if we say, this would be my take on it, there's probably about 75% of the world that are basically really good people trying to do the right thing, even if they don't know about the mysteries, even if they don't feel like they're very advanced. The truth is that their hearts are good, their intentions are good, and of course they can be stressed out and have a moment of road rage, but for the most part they're going to try to help their neighbors and do the right thing. Then you've got about probably 15 or 20, maybe 15% of the people, 20% that are very badly programmed. They've come through terrible things: abuse, sexual abuse, rape, emotional detachment disorder, and so consequently they're robbing and stealing and killing and murdering and raping, and they're just acting very badly and creating more destruction in their own lives and in the lives of others. And then you've got 5% of the people that really are kind of like downright on the dark side of the force. I mean, these are people who knowingly and consciously are doing all the wrong things for self-gain, for ego, for power and control. These are the people many times who want these artifacts. And there are sacred artifacts that have power in them. And I've been around some of these artifacts, and, I'm shamanically trained. And it's like they become vessels. Of course, at the end of the day, we are the most powerful vessel of all, right? But the Ark of the Covenant was a communication device that the Anunnaki gods gave to the Egyptians, and it was also a manifestation device. It's kind of like it amplified your thoughts. And so when Moses left, the real reason that the Pharaoh didn't want Moses to leave was because he didn't want to give up the Ark of the Covenant. And as we know, it seemed to produce some kind of radiation. So they handled it very gingerly. There were, when the can't remember, it wasn't the Hittites, when one of those groups stole it from the Hebrews, it wound up, creating havoc for them, and lots of people died. And even when it was brought back to the Israelites, I think there was like 40,000 people that were killed at one point. So it was obviously a very, very, very dangerous object, and you had to really know what you were doing. Well, of course, most of us would not know what we were doing at all. Even the bad guys wouldn't know what they were doing. So I'm sure that the bad guys have tried to get a hold of any objects of power they possibly could, because they are desperate to try to maintain control over the masses. And because of the internet, because of programs like this, because of books and publishing and education so that we can read, because there are people all over the world now that are finding each other, no matter what country or religion that they're in, and discovering that they're conscious people everywhere, it's getting harder and harder for them to suppress this truth that has been suppressed for centuries and centuries and centuries. So it's like the sleeping giant, and we are part of that movement, of that rising tide of consciousness. And so I really think also that the ETs, the Galactic Council, is keeping tabs on a lot of this stuff. They are not interested in us going into the ocean like we did with Atlantis and having to start over. And furthermore, when we have a pole shift, which is a whole nother conversation, we have nuclear power plants on this planet where we could completely contaminate this planet beyond recognition, and no one would be able to live here. And as a result of that, they are keeping tabs, I think, on some of the bad guys. I think they are making communications with scientists and educators, with some politicians, and in order to say, you guys have to change your ways. You really do, or there's going to be direct interference. And so I really wouldn't worry too much about that. I'd like to know more about it. If you want to call me and tell me about it, happy to hear. But I really wouldn't worry about it too much, because I really don't think they're going to be allowed to use it. And I have a feeling even if they had it, it'd probably hit them in the face and boomerang on them. I mean, if it can take out 40,000 Israelites and a whole bunch of Philistines, then imagine even with scientists what it might do. So, but good question. Very good question.
Tricia,
Very interesting.
Tricia,
Yeah?
a couple of questions in the Q&A area, so let me read these ones to you. Okay, is there a chance that the lost pages of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene can be found, and are there living descendants of Mary and Jesus existing today?
Great question. I personally think that there will be another copy of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene found. I believe that there have been 2 or 3 sections that have been found. I think one in Damascus, that one in Egypt, and then I think another one. And they've cobbled together these pages as far as they've gotten. But obviously, to our knowledge, they don't have a complete version. But I think that would be really, really exciting. I believe that there are artifacts that are hidden, that the Cathars took down the walls. If you guys, I don't know if you know how much of your history you know, but basically at the end of about 1000, to 1100 AD, the priest had gotten to where they were selling wine out of the church, and they were, into sex and all sorts of things that they shouldn't have been into. The popes had set up prostitution brothels where they went and they made the money from the women that they had put into slavery. I mean, it's horrible. So there were a lot of people like us waking up and going, this is not Christianity. And so there were other movements like the Waldensians and the Cathars that began. The Cathars meant the pure, and they traveled as a male and female couple, telling you that they knew about Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and they were supported actually by the Templars, but they lived in relative poverty. Well, they became such a threat because they taught reincarnation, they knew about Mary Magdalene and Jesus and the Merovingian lineage. Of course, the Catholic Church didn't want their dirty laundry to come out, so they started exterminating them. And the last big extermination was at a place called Montsegur, where they sort of had captured them, and they hired some German mercenary knights to besiege them, and eventually they ran out of food and so forth. Well, they had certain artifacts, and that's what the church wanted. They had a sword, they had a crystal skull, they had the Book of Love by John, and they may also have had like the book from Mary Magdalene. Well, those Cathars called a 2-week ceasefire, agreeing to surrender at the end of that time, which they did, and they walked consciously into the flames and perished. But they used that 2 weeks to scale down the walls and to smuggle these artifacts out. And these artifacts, I think, are in 2 places. One of them in the caves in France, and the other, they went up to Scotland and England. And this is one of the things you see when you look at the purging, the witch trials. They were trying to get rid of the psychic DNA. And it was the old lineage of the priest and the priestesses, the healers and the shamans that had been part of the infrastructure of the entire European society. In every village, there was a male and a female, let us say, priest or shaman, and they went to school. Like in the north of France, there was a school, a whole full course of study was 20 years. So you might just want to be a healer and be there 7 or 8 years, but then you would be sent to different villages and eventually probably go back to your original village. And in every village, the current shamans would pick a little boy and a little girl that they saw showed promise. People like us that would be intuitive or kind or compassionate or really wanting to do the right thing, and they would send them to the Druid schools, and they were up in Brittany and also the north of France. Well, about that time around 900, between 900 and 1000 AD, the Catholic Church decided to get rid of this. So they destroyed the church. They sent Roman soldiers to murder the healers and the priests and the priestesses that were still living side by side in a lot of these villages with the Christian priest. But they were like a psychologist and a doctor and a healer, everything all rolled into one. So they were breaking the back. And so the next thrust of this was the Cathars. So when the Inquisition started, which didn't really start until the 1300s, basically the Catholic Church had such success in the mid-1200s that they decided, geez, that we can get away with like literally murder, rounding them up, putting them in a church and burning them to the ground with everybody inside. And they did that. There are historical reports of that. From a Christian church, unbelievable. Well, that began, they basically came up with what was called the Hammer of Witches, which was supposedly written by 2 German guys, but guess what? It was written in Latin, not German. So who knows Latin? That was the Catholic Church. And it basically, Malus Malefictium, it basically gave these crazy inquisitors a right to basically torture anybody that they wanted to. And it was all about getting rid of the psychic DNA. So the people who survived ran up to Scotland. And that's why, like when you look at the UFO phenomena, something like 49% of all abductees are Native American or British, Scottish, Irish bloodlines, because they were looking for the psychic DNA. If the ETs are trying to sort of like, take derivatives, sperm and egg from us for their own people, they wanted to start with as much psychic DNA as they could. So I believe that those artifacts still exist, but the question is where they're hidden. And to say too much more about where they're hidden, even on a podcast like this, makes it public. And so we don't really want to give the powers that be any opportunity to find these artifacts. I hope that answers that question. Oh, what was the other question? The other part of it, Neil?
The other part was, are there any descendants of Mary and Jesus existing today?
Well, that's a very good question. I don't know the answer to that question. The Holy Blood, Holy Grail believes that there is. And certainly that makes sense because in the first place, if they killed all the male heirs and only one escaped, that's going to be one bloodline. That bloodline became, I think, the planchettes, or meaning the small seed. That's what that name meant. But remember, the females of that line were forced to marry the usurper line. And, this is also goes back to the Knights Templar. The Cathars, first the Jews were suppressed and run out or killed or told they had to convert. I think that was like the end of the 1100s. Then you have the Cathars and the Waldensians and all those guys that were persecuted and murdered up to about the middle of the 1200s. Then, the King of France was Philippe the Fair. That's anytime they say Pope Innocent, he's not innocent. Philippe the Fair, he's not fair. It's like it's like the big lie, I'll just name myself Philippe the Fair, and then I can do whatever I want to, and everyone will think in history I was fair. Yeah, so the big lie. So Philippe, of course, wanted to get into the Knights Templar because it was cool. Well, of course, they didn't want him in the Knights Templar because the Knights Templar knew all about the usurper line, and they didn't want him knowing, so they kept him out. So he was pretty angry about this. So he wound up trying to get the Priory of Sion's charter revoked. And the Pope that was in power didn't do it. So he had him poisoned and murdered. And then he put his own Pope on the throne in Rome in order to revoke the charter. And that happened, I think, around 1307 or 1309 AD. And this is where the Friday the 13th thing comes from. We're on that Friday the 13th. Philippe the Fair had sent out orders to all of his military captains to go and round up all the Knights Templars. Well, these were noble knights that had money, that had lent money to Philippe the Fair. He didn't have the money to pay it back. So on one hand, he got rid of the competition. He arrested them, tortured them, killed them, but he wiped out his debt, so he never had to pay it back. I don't think Philippe the Fair was very fair. And some of them, of course, escaped to Scotland. Once again, this is the only place anybody could run as far as the earth would allow them at that time. So I believe that there would be descendants because the females were forced to marry into the line. Now, whether or not those people know that they're descendants, that's a different story altogether. Some people believe there was only one child of Jesus, others that there were 3 children. Some believe that Sarah, which was this girl that was on the ship with Mary Magdalene and Joseph of Arimathea and those 12 disciples that were coming from Jerusalem to Sainte Marie de la Mer, that she was Mary's daughter. Some believe she was a servant girl, but she dived off the ship and, got to land. So there's stories about Sarah. There's statues to Sarah in the south of France. Others say that she had a daughter and then she had at least 1 or 2 sons. And as I said, there are stories about Mary Magdalene, first in France, then she goes to England where Joseph of Arimathea is, probably spends time raising her children. But in this hidden teachings, these hidden writings that I've spent a long time studying, every 3 years there was a conclave, and it usually took place on the Isle of Cyprus. And the Christians that could come came, and it was for an entire week or 2. And Mary Magdalene was the major teacher. She would speak in the morning, and then everyone would share their own thoughts and visit with each other in the afternoon. And then the next day she would sort of give her thought for the day, or her wisdom or teaching for the day, and everyone would share in the afternoon. So it was not like one person was this is the only way it is. She was considered the teacher of the inner church. And then there was plenty of room for people to share their beliefs or their feelings or their thoughts, with one another in fellowship. And so, I hope that answers your question, and I probably went in several different directions to do it. But one of the places you can find out more about Mary Magdalene that I feel like is very valid is I have two friends in England. They are lovely people, Stuart Wilson and Joanna Prentice. They're elderly people, but they are hypnotherapists who have been at this work for 30 years. And they have a spiritual center there. They did for many years. And they have hypnotized people and taken them back. And their first book was called The Essenes, Children of the Light. I would highly recommend it. It's 5 different Essenes that were alive at the time of Jesus. And some of them are older than Jesus. Some of them were younger than Jesus. Also, Dolores Cannon's book. She has 2 or 3 books, again, through hypnosis. One of her people was a guy named Sudi, who was S-U-D-D-I, who was a teacher at the Mount Carmel School, who taught Jesus and John the Baptist, and who actually saw the Star of Bethlehem and describes it as 4 lights that came together and shone a beam of light down almost like a spaceship or something. But this is a really excellent book by them. It's called The Power of the Magdalene. And this actually is, again, hypnosis sessions with people that knew Mary, the mother, and Mary Magdalene, and talk openly about the time. Also, Joseph of Arimathea. They actually hypnotized the soul that was Joseph of Arimathea. Now, these people had no conscious knowledge of this. I want to make that point. They didn't claim to be these people. They went into such deep trance, they did not know what they said. They were not aware of what they said. It was, of course, all recorded. In one case, 2 of the men were in hypnosis together. They had never met before. They spoke ancient Aramaic to each other, and they had been friends in that period of time. So Stuart Wilson, Joanna Prentice, The Power of the Magdalene, this is one I think you might want to really pick up. I know that there's some other wonderful things like Anna, the grandmother of Jesus, and I actually have that book and have not read it. And it's not because it might not be a wonderful book. I've heard it is a great book, but it's because I, as a researcher, I do channel, but I am trying to write books for you guys that are very grounded in facts, so that if you took them to your fundamentalist family, and like I have a fundamentalist family, and you said, this is a book about Jesus or Mary Magdalene, it wouldn't be channeled. I give you the footnotes, I give you the bibliography, I give you all the back matter. If there's a question, you can follow that breadcrumb trail, because the only way we're going to really change the consciousness of people who are stuck in their old way is to give them enough evidence to open up to consider something new. And if I say it's channeled, even though it could be true or it might not be true, there's room for doubt. It's another thing if it's someone who has no preconceptions, puts someone else under hypnosis in a deep state, and information comes through that's then corroborated by other sources. I hope that helps. I know I've just gone on and on here, but hopefully that's insightful for you. Okay. Margot, things have gone fast in spiritual growth and knowing Jesus and myself these past 2 or 3 years. We'll write more to you later. Sending much love. Thank you so much, Margot. I appreciate it. Here's Lauren. What happened to the ark? Is it still on the planet? The belief is that it's in Ethiopia and guarded, and that whoever goes inside and guards it from the ends, there's a outer temple and an inner temple. Whoever goes into the inner temple, it's a commitment for life. You never leave that space again. They send you food, they send you water, but you don't come out and see your parents. You don't come out and date or go to any parties or festivals. It is a lifelong commitment. And the consciousness of the person who is there, I think they have to become a vegetarian. I think they have to really be in a very pure meditative state, because otherwise, whatever the energy is around that ark pretty much will strike them dead. So I think it's in Ethiopia. Linda, thank you for your answer and for adding some light to this topic. Okay. Were there any other questions that you see, Neil?
There's one more question from Evelyn. She said that she broke her wrist and was intrigued by the healing aspect of what you spoke about. What was that the union of 2? If so, how do I go about this process? Love your talk.
Okay, so broke your wrist, your left to your right. Type it in if you don't mind. let me just say on my end, I actually broke my foot a couple of years ago. And this is one of the ways I discovered whole brain thinking. So I want to address that. I had gone to a friend's house. It was right around the Christmas, a little before Christmas, and it was nighttime, and another girlfriend had bought a new used car, and we were all walking down the hill in the dark to her new used car, and my foolish girlfriend had parked so that when you stepped off the curb where I stepped off, it fell away into the opposite way from how your foot was going, which was this way, into a drainage ditch. And that's exactly what happened. I broke my foot, fell, sprained both wrists. It was terrible. And of course, I was in a lot of pain, and I went to the doctor, found out it was broken, but I was in a bad mood. I mean, for about a month. And I had, of course, had clients who were trying to get me to do readings and so forth. And I said, I can't do the readings. I'm not balanced. I could tell I wasn't balanced. The only way I can do these readings as a clairvoyant is to be very connected and very balanced. And so one of my clients said, well, I've heard about this thing about balancing your brain. So she sent me this little video, and I started doing it. And darn if it didn't work. Within a week, my brain went back into balance, and I then, for the next 3 months, wrote a 500-page novel. So, I mean, my brain was clearly working. I was in the download of the channeling. And I still gave it another month before I saw clients, and I started doing readings again in February. But that whole thing really got me understanding about whole brain thinking. I had a friend, the girlfriend who had the car that we were going to see, who had fallen and broken her wrist a week before I broke my foot. And she had done it in a bowling alley, so there was insurance. So she was able to go to 5 therapists a week, the physical therapist, the psychologist, therapist, every therapist. Well, she came back and she said, they tell me I have post-traumatic stress disorder. I was like, I thought that was something, Vietnam vets got or something. And she said, no, it's where part of the brain's turned off. Well, as soon as she said it, I saw it. And I realized that our brains are like a neural net, like if you were in outer space and looking down on North America and you saw all the web of the lights that connect us, that's how the brain is. So imagine if the entire East Coast went dark, your right side of your brain. And so the only part of your brain you're able to function with is the West Coast. That's it. Well, that's kind of what happens to a lot of the soldiers that go to battle. The military is trying to first kind of tune down their intuitive, empathetic side and focus on their hierarchical, take orders, obey, and don't think too much for yourself, just do what you need to do side. That's the masculine side. And so then what happens is they've got rifles and falls and grenades and gunshots and tanks and all the things. By the time they come back, they're really traumatized, and only part of their brain's working. So they come back to their lives and they try to, restart their marriages. Maybe they have a child now, figure out what kind of job they're going to get over the trauma of what happened, but they're not able to think outside the box because this side of the brain is closed. They are, and they're hurt, they're angry, and they're, this side, the male side, is like a box. You can organize really well within the box, but you can't figure out how to think outside the box. And anything from outside that you don't know becomes angry, fearful, frustrating. You go into attack mode. The female side of the brain comes up with all sorts of out-of-the-box solutions. And so, of course, they can't figure out how to manage their lives because they can't think outside the box, and they're having to create a new life. And so, as a result, 2,500 veterans kill themselves every single month. Unbelievable. And I just put 2 little videos on YouTube, which you can go and watch, about whole brain thinking. You can put whole brain thinking, Tricia McCannon, where I show you how to do this process and how to do this exercise to rebalance your brain. So whether you've fallen in the bathtub, hit your head, been in a car accident, had a concussion, fallen in sports, anything like that, it's a really good thing to do. Even if you haven't done those things, it's a good thing to do. You can do it 2 or 3 times a day. It takes a minute to do it and really start to get the whole brain going online. So as for your wrist, there are a couple of things I can suggest that might be useful. There's something called a flame. I don't know if you've heard of it. They're biogenesis tools. That seems to take the spiral energy of the universe and plug it into the broken bone to accelerate its healing. The other thing is that I've heard that the purring of cats is a vibration that makes bones heal faster than any other thing. So you could look online and see if you can find a tape or a DVD or CD that has the purring of cats and play it all night, every night. Okay, and that would help to accelerate the healing of your wrist bone. Okay, so I hope that helps a little bit. Donna, do you feel the need for more light workers today? Oh, it's your left hand. Yeah. So it's your left hand. So it's the opposite. Usually it's the opposite side. You know, the right brain is connected to the left side of the body, and the left brain, the masculine, is connected to the right side of the body. And so the only thing I can say is you might just consider, and some things I think are just an accident. You know, your immune system's down, you're in an area where there's germs, you get the flu. You're living under a power line, you get cancer. It's, you know, but other things, of course, are emotion that are stuffed into the body, or opportunities for learning, like that very unhappy thing where it took me 10 months to be able to walk without my foot hurting. That was an opportunity for learning, but at the time, believe me, I sure didn't feel like that. I was pretty annoyed that it had happened. So your left hand, you might just ask yourself and sit with this. Is there anything you're not receiving? Are you always giving, 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 and you're not letting yourself receive, whether it's love, money, nurturance, whatever? And sit with that and see, because of course the left side is the receiving side. Maybe it's creative ideas that you've had that you haven't taken the time to write down, or maybe it's just receiving love from others. You know, women, so many times we're the givers. We're always giving, 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 giving. We've been very well programmed for several thousand years to be the ones that are, you know, always giving. As they would say in Egypt, Hathor, the goddess of milk and honey, the cow that all the goodness comes from those little udders. So Donna, do you feel the need for more light workers today? Thank you for the information sharing. Thank you so much, Donna. I really appreciate you tuning in. And I hope that, Evelyn, if it's you with the hand, I sure hope your wrist gets better. But it's going to be challenging for a while, you know, and you really should contain it, because it's your wrist, and you got to take the time to really let it heal. All you can do is accelerate it. Okay, are we, I think we're right at about 6 o'clock, Neil. What do you think? Anybody else?
We're no more questions, so go ahead and wrap it up. You can share your websites once more and then close it up.
Yeah, again, thank you guys so very much. My website is my name, TriciaMcCannonSpeaks.com, and my email is my name, Tricia McCannon 1111. So that's 1111, 4 ones. You'd be shocked how many people put 2 ones or 3 ones. No, it's 4 ones at yahoo.com. And please put in the tagline, you know, from the Mary Magdalene webinar, or interested in the Mary Magdalene trip to France, or the Sophia Rising project. You know, please note it that way, because I get a lot of emails, and that way I'll try to go right to it, and it won't get passed over by some accident. And then if you're interested in readings or healings or any of those things, you can certainly call me. I'm happy to speak with you. On my website, I have a whole section about how the readings go, astrology-wise, clairvoyant-wise. I'm trained in about 10 different healing modalities, from hypnotherapy to soul retrieval, holographic repatterning, to voice dialogue. I clear vows, curses, bindings, erroneous belief systems, old soul contracts. I do all that stuff. But where I can do the readings on the telephone, the healing work I actually have to do in person. And I am going to come up to New York, as I said, the beginning of April. And I usually, when I go someplace to speak, I'll stay over for about 5 days. So if you're in that area and you're interested, it's always best to call me ahead, because usually by the time I get there, I only have a few openings. So I would invite any of you that are interested, you're very welcome to call me. My number again is 678-309-0888. And if you don't mind, kind of wait till maybe tomorrow. I'm going to be at my 91-year-old mom's tomorrow afternoon, but I'll be around in the morning, and I'll be around Monday afternoon and Tuesday afternoon, and I'll be happy to speak with you. Thank you so very much for joining us today. And until the next time, I hope you'll join us for the next one that we do in April, and also the one on Atlantis in May. Thanks so much. Good night.